Good evening. I would like to welcome each and every one of you in Baltimore tuned into our annual Baltimore City Board of Estimates Taxpayers Night. In April of last year, during the early days of the pandemic, the Board of Estimates took an unprecedented step of holding Taxpayers Night virtually. Once again, this year, we're in the same posture because of the state of COVID-19 in the city of Baltimore. I'd like to thank the staff of the Budget Office, my staff, and the staffs of my fellow members of the Board of Estimates for planning this event tonight for you, the taxpayers. Taxpayers Night is an important part of the budget process for Baltimore City. The purpose of this event is to provide the public with an opportunity to comment on the preliminary budget for fiscal year 2022 that was recommended by the Board of Estimates by the Department of Finance earlier this month. I would like to note that at the top, while those testifying may at times be passionate, we expect that members of the board and members of the public will keep order and ensure that we respect one another and provide each other the opportunity to be heard. Persons who are disruptive may be asked to leave the meeting or ejected from the virtual meeting. It's important to keep order, it's important to keep dialogue, it's important to keep discourse, and we should do this respectfully. Our agenda for this evening is pretty straightforward. Shortly, I'll introduce the Bureau of Budget and Management Research, and they will give a brief presentation on the highlights of the preliminary budget. Following that, I will have instructions on how public testimony will proceed. Then we will open the floor and hear from members of the public as you talk about your city and this budget. Before I turn it over to Budget Team, I would like to introduce the members of the Board of Estimates. First, myself as City Council President Mosby, I serve as the Chair of the Board of Estimates. Joining me are my partners in progress. It's Mayor Brandon M. Scott and Comptroller Bill Henry. Also part of the board is City Solicitor Jim Shea, as well as Director of Department of Public Works, Matthew Garbuck. At this time, I would like to welcome Mr. Bob. Actually, we're going to go to members of the board. We've had it later. I know that the mayor would like to give some opening remarks, and then we'll go down the line. Followed by Comptroller Henry, then City Solicitor Shea, and then last but certainly not least, Director Garbart. So Mr. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you everyone who has joined us. I will be very brief. And thank you, Mr. President, for making sure again that this year that we have this most important meetings of the Board of Estimates, albeit in a virtual setting. And I know we have many people set out to testify tonight. And when I took office, I talked about increasing public participation in the budget process. And we look forward as we move into next year to taking that to the next level as we work to build the next fiscal year budget. But I wanted to briefly touch on this preliminary budget. The fiscal year 2022 budget that we are here to discuss tonight represents continuity of services for our residents as we continue to navigate this pandemic of COVID-19. We all understand the major hits caused to our budget by COVID, and it's imperative that we be responsible stewards of our public dollars. But before we get started, I want to reaffirm again my commitment to bringing our budget into stronger alignment with our priorities as we move forward in my administration. In fiscal year 22, we are seeing the impact of increased pensions and healthcare costs that are driving agencies like the police department share the budget. This does not reflect the direction that I want to and that we will move in the future. Earlier this month, I announced that we'll be picking up on the work I started last year and establishing a advisory group that will develop a 5-year plan on how we can responsibly reduce the police department's burden on the budget. That group will identify cost shifts that can be made while proposing recommendations to divert appropriate service requests so that officers can focus on their job and we can have professionals focus on things that they can in a city like Baltimore. We will work tirelessly to reimagine public safety in Baltimore, and we understand that in a city that's budgeted the way that it has for my entire lifetime, it's going to take more than one fiscal year, and it's going to take tough work to make those changes. We must be strategic and responsible, particularly as we're continuing to honor the fulfillments of the federal consent decree without cutting corners, and the police reform efforts that we all just celebrated in Annapolis, and we will do that by establishing a fiscal blueprint rooted in oversight and accountability. We will continue to think and work in new ways to make sure that we are being a better, holistic, comprehensive Baltimore moving forward. I look forward to hearing from everyone tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also want to thank everyone who signed up to testify or has submitted testimony in advance for tonight's event. I'm sorry, Mr. President. I should also take a point now to say that for anyone who is concerned, tonight is not the final opportunity to give input on the city's budget. After the Board of Estimates sends an approved budget to the City Council as an ordinance of estimates, the Council is going to hold its own Taxpayers Night, along with in-depth agency hearings during the months of May and June. I wanted to be clear, Mr. President, I find myself at this point a little envious of the Council's opportunity to review the budget in substantially greater detail than the Board of Estimates is able to. Despite being the board charged with formulating and executing the fiscal policy of the city's current budget process allows us but a few weeks to review a very top-level budget book with relatively few details on specific spending, which is why I wanted to take this opportunity to urge the mayor and his administration, as they reimagine the budget next year, also reimagine the budget process. There is no better way to ensure that our city's budget reflects the desired outcomes of its people than to make the process itself more open and more collaborative. We should redesign the existing process so that more information, like the agency detail books, is available to the public sooner. We should also be providing more opportunities than just this one Taxpayers Night for the public to give informed input to us, the Board of Estimates, about how we propose to spend billions of dollars of their money. As the preliminary budget stands right now, I do have serious concerns with our priorities and the direction our city is headed. I have shared them previously with the mayor and others on the board. I commend the mayor and his administration for the innovations that they have spearheaded and have managed to fit into this budget that they did not begin, such as recycling cans for every household, the reframing of the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, launch of the city's open checkbook. But the proposed budget before us is largely a continuation of the status quo, repeating too many of the spending trends we followed for too many years. I understand the importance of providing continuity of service, but that shouldn't have to mean continuity of the status quo. Plainly put, Baltimore City needs a budget which allocates less money to the police department and invests more money into our own people and their communities. This preliminary budget increases the funding for the BPD by more than 5%, which translates to an additional $27.6 million. Yes, a big chunk of that is pension fund contributions to which we are obligated, but at the same time, this preliminary budget also includes a 17% cut to YouthWorks of $1.9 million. Right there, this is the most graphic illustration of misplaced priorities, that we could not find a way to cut even 1/3% from the police budget so that we could hold harmless a program which employs thousands of city youth each summer. We need to find a way to invest in people's lives, to make it so that they don't have to commit crimes in order to survive. Better policing is only one part of public safety. Addressing poverty and other root causes of crime are a substantially larger part, and our budget should reflect such thinking. Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me this time to address the board and the public. I look forward to hearing from our residents tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Next up, we'll hear from the city solicitor, Mr. Jim Shea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am delighted to be of service to the city of Baltimore and its citizens, and I'm very interested this evening to hear the taxpayers' thoughts about how their money should be spent. Thank you, and I look forward to this evening.
And last but certainly not least, the Director of DPW, Mr. Matt Garbar.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I stand with my colleagues, Solicitor Shea, in supporting the mayor and all of you on the Board of Estimates as you lead this public process to hear from the public about their priorities and their views. Representing the largest agency in terms of the capital budget and all of our other construction agencies, I look forward to the plan from the Department of Finance as we work to invest in our infrastructure and be able to put the men and women of this city to work in rebuilding our city. So I thank all of you for that, and I look forward to hearing everyone's comments.
Thank you all. At this time, I'll welcome Mr. Bob Cenamy, Director of the Bureau of Budget and Management Research. In addition to his duties as the Budget Director, Bob has two newborn twins at home. So we're going to congratulate him and thank him for spending his evening with us and the taxpayers tonight. Bob, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate that. I'm very tired at the moment from having two newborns in the house, but I'm very excited to be here tonight to present the fiscal 22 preliminary budget plan to the Board of Estimates and to the public. I'm going to try to keep my comments to 15 to 20 minutes. I want to give a real high-level overview of how the budget process works, some of the key highlights and some of the trends we're seeing. But we're eager, of course, to get to the comment period where folks have signed up. So again, point of my comments is to try to give people a very high-level overview of the budget. There's a lot more detail in the preliminary budget book, which is on our website at bbmar.baltimorecity.gov. And our staff, of course, are always available to answer questions for anything you see in the book. If you're not sure how to interpret anything, we're always welcome to answer those questions. So the agenda tonight, I would break it down into three key portions. One is just a rough overview of how the budget works, where the money comes from, how the money is spent. The second section will get more into some detailed recommendations, some of the highlights of those of our fiscal 22 budget. And then I'd like to close spending a little bit of time talking about COVID-19, what the city has done to respond, and how federal aid has really given us a lifeline to get through this pandemic because of the financial toll. So let's jump right into it. First, you'll hear us first in terms of the overview. You'll hear us tonight talk a little bit about operating budget versus capital budget. The operating budget is the funds that cover the daily business of the city, whereas the capital budget funds any physical infrastructure improvement. So as you can see here, most of our plan tonight, $3.2 billion is the operating budget, about $453 million is a capital plan. And in visual terms, what that looks like on the next slide, capital budget would be the actual pool itself, whereas the operating budget would be the people or the lifeguards and the staff that manage the pool. So I just wanted to make that distinction before we jump into the numbers on the next slide. So the fiscal 22 budget by the numbers, operating plan is recommended at $3.15 billion. Capital budget is recommended at $453.7 million for a total of $3.6 billion. I would mention on the general fund specifically, you'll notice at the bottom, there's an $84.3 million increase in the general fund budget from fiscal 21. That's a 4.4% change. But I wanted to highlight that of that increase, about 52 million of that is federal aid that we're allowed to use for general fund purposes, which I'll touch on a little bit later in the presentation. Next, I wanted to go through just a couple of our high-level revenue projections, just to give the public tonight a flavor for what we're seeing in the general fund and some of the revenue sources that have changed dramatically. So first off, our operating budget is broken into three sources. There's the general fund, which is the largest fund. $2 billion of our plan is general fund expenses. And that fund includes all of the local taxes and fees that are paid by local residents and businesses. and we have the most flexibility on how that money is spent. Our budget also includes grant funds, which are monies that come from either the federal, state grantors or private donations, and those are restricted for certain purposes. And we also have what we call enterprise funds, which are funds that are used to cover the cost of service, largely through user charges, and the big ones are the water and wastewater utilities. In terms of where just the general fund money comes from, you can see here that by far the largest source is property taxes, about half of our revenue in the general fund. Income taxes, the next largest at a little less than 20%. And then we do receive some smaller amounts of funds for things like other local taxes, state highway user revenues, state aid, and some charges for services, for example. Tonight, I just wanted to highlight for the general fund revenue. So we had previous to fiscal 22, we were on a decade-long streak where we were essentially growing in the general fund each year, and that was because the economy was growing each of those years. That was clearly broken last year with the pandemic. We had a decline in general funds last year for the first time in over a decade. In fiscal 22, this we think is the beginning of a recovery. We don't know how fast the recovery will be, but we are feeling better and better as each day passes, that as the vaccination rate picks up and people get back to more of a normal course of business, that we will see some of our revenues improve. And I wanted to highlight just a couple of revenue sources tonight without going into all the gory detail. On the next slide, if you would. So one that has been a struggle for us is hotel tax. So during the pandemic, you can see the light blue graph bar here is the actual hotel tax receipts in fiscal 21, the year we're in, versus the budget. You can see it's $9.5 million below what we had even expected with COVID-19. So it's been much worse than even we could have anticipated. In fiscal 22, we're starting to see that. We expect that to recover. Our projection is 19.6 million, but you can see that 19.6 million is still well below what we were receiving in that source from pre-pandemic levels going back to fiscal 20 and before. The same is true in our next revenue source in parking revenue. So this is another one that we got hit pretty hard. The fiscal 21 budget was for $22.3 million of net parking revenues. We're actually, this is a negative number here. We actually don't have enough parking revenues to even cover the cost of parking expenses, which includes enforcement, personnel, and garages. So a real sharp drop off in parking revenue, but that we, again, expect to start to recover in fiscal 22 and to get back to a net gain position from parking revenues. One last example that we wanted to share in the other direction was traffic camera revenue. When we started the pandemic, we expected with fewer drivers on the roads that we would see fewer citations. But actually what happened was during the pandemic with less traffic, people were speeding more often, they were breaking traffic laws more often, and we actually issued more citations during the early stages of the pandemic. We expect next year for our trend to continue where we issue fewer and fewer citations each year as the behavior changes from our residents traveling on our streets, and people get used to the cameras and again become more compliant with those traffic laws. So I'm not going to go into all of the revenue detail. All of that is in the preliminary book, but just wanted to give you a flavor for the challenge that we have right now during the pandemic to try to predict which way some of these revenues, which direction those are going to head. Next slide. Wanted to talk briefly about the capital budget and what the capital budget is. All of these items listed here are things that we would consider a capital project. So again, think of physical infrastructure, things like roads and bridges, the construction or repair of a library, a rec center. All those things are things that would fall into our capital budget. The capital budget by source on the next slide, it comes from some of the same sources as our operating budget, but we are also able to borrow money for our capital budget. So you'll notice on the right-hand side, we borrow $80 million a year of city that's backed by the city. We call those general obligation bonds. We pay those costs back out of the general fund. We put some city general funds towards capital projects. And we also issue what we call transportation bonds, also a means by which we can borrow to do capital projects. but the majority of the capital budget is in what we call revenue loans. Those are loans, bond funds where they are paid back by the water, wastewater, and stormwater utility funds. They're backed by the revenues in those funds. And the capital budget funding tends to be a little bit, I would call it more lumpy or uneven from year to year, because so much of the capital budget is made up of those water, wastewater, and stormwater revenue bond funds. Those kind of come in and out. So we'll have phases where we do a bunch of issuance of debt to borrow for those projects, and then we run those funds down over the next couple of years. So you'll see sometimes a big bump in one year and a big decline in the next year. And again, that's largely due to the structure and the timing of when the city borrows for those really high value infrastructure projects. So that is just a real brief overview again for how the budget works, difference between operating and capital, and some of the sources for folks that are joining for the first time. Now I want to spend the rest of the time getting into briefly some of the highlights of the budget for this year. So a couple highlights. First, as the mayor mentioned, this budget is maintaining critical city services. Last year when we were here, because we had sharp declines in revenue, we were announcing some trims and cuts to services. That is not the case this year. We're able to maintain all city services. We're utilizing $52 million of federal aid to support our COVID-19 response, which I'll touch on a little bit later. We're kicking off the recycling can initiative. We're leveraging some new city funds to access state weatherization resources, and we think we'll be able to do 500 more home projects with those funds. We're continuing what we call the SOS cleanup program in the stormwater utility, which helps residents if they have a sewage overflow into their home. We're funding the translation of documents across all city agencies to make sure that residents can get access to those services in multiple languages if need be. And we're also continuing the implementation of our enterprise resource system, what we call the ERP system, which is meant to replace all of our aging financial and human resource systems over the course of the next 3 years. I'm going into some of the priorities. We organize our budget around 5 general categories. They're listed here. And again, you can see more detail about some of these measures in the preliminary book, but I wanted to give just a couple highlights on each one of these 5 outcomes. So first, on prioritizing youth, on the next slide. So the support for city schools is $360 million in the fiscal 22 budget. That includes what we call maintenance of effort, which is a payment to the city schools for their operating budget. Also the cost of retiree benefits for schools, retirees, school construction program that the city contributes to, and school health and crossing guard services. We do have new state mandated contributions beginning in fiscal 23. That is because of the bill that passed at the General Assembly, the Kerwin bill. Those contributions are not expected to start, will not start now until fiscal 2023. And also under youth, fully funding our library system. And we think that this funding will be able to get us to make sure we can safely reopen our branch libraries, as well as to continue some of the digital library services that we started during the pandemic. Under public safety, 2 highlights here, the group violence reduction plan. So the city is restarting what we call this GVRS strategy. We have leveraged, raised some money from private funders who are excited about this strategy. We're also contributing some general funds to match that. And the idea is to restart this strategy. This is an evidence-based strategy that has shown promise for reducing violent crime. And in the other highlight here is our 911 fee. We have decided to raise our 911 fee, which is a fee that is levied on your monthly telephone bill. And the reason for that is that the state and nationally is moving to more better, improved, state-of-the-art public safety technology with the 911 service. And there will be better call networks, better location data to identify where callers are coming from. And in order to fund the cost for that, we are raising the fee by a quarter per line per month. We expect that will generate about $1.1 million in fiscal 22. Next, Clean and healthy communities. I mentioned both of these. We're continuing the pilot of what we call the Sewage on-site support program, and we're also kicking off the distribution of recycling cans. That's a $8.3 million total cost, and we've been able to cobble together the money from a private grant, from a no-interest loan, and from some city resources out of the stormwater utility fund. Next on equitable neighborhood development, two things in MOED. MOED is putting in place we think a better strategy to provide what they call access points or intake points, where when folks come into the career centers, they can be monitored and you figure out exactly what career services those folks are looking for and direct them to the right level of service for their need. We also are working between MOED and the health department on what we call career navigators. So we have a lot of staff that are on the payroll now that are temporary contact tracers that are working on COVID-19 related issues. But when the pandemic goes away, eventually we're trying to figure out how we can help those folks connect to other job readiness services so we can keep them employed. And then finally, the fifth priority outcome is the responsible stewardship of city resources. Two highlights here. We've hired a digital equity coordinator, which will be funded with $200,000 of grant support. The focus here is on figuring out how we can expand affordable internet access to our most vulnerable households that don't have it today. And we're also funding a $200,000 loan to our Office of Technology to invest in an online chat system for our 311 service. So folks who have gone, looked at, done any shopping online, sometimes there's a chat that will pop up that will help direct your questions. We're trying to do something similar there on our 311 system so that we can direct those calls when you do call most efficiently. Next slide, please. A couple highlights of the capital budget. I won't go into all the gory detail here again, but the Department of Planning releases a project-by-project capital budget document that shows all the detail. You can see here on this slide investments in information technology, city buildings, school buildings and upgrades, recreation and parks, including money for recreation center enhancements, new parks and new pools, and also $68 million for transportation infrastructure that comes from a variety of sources, both federal, state, and local. And continuing on the next slide, there's also money for solid waste facilities, including money to go towards improving and expanding our Quarantine Road landfill, $45 million to housing and community development for a variety of projects, and at the bottom, these customary investments in water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. Okay, so next, in closing, before we get to the public comment, I just wanted to touch a few minutes on COVID-19 response and federal aid. So as folks know, there was a series of bills that were passed over the last year. And the next slide will show you the chronology of that, what has happened so far. So the first Congress passed what we call the CARES Act. That was March of 2020. That provided $103 million of direct aid to Baltimore City, most of which has been spent, but some more will be spent in fiscal 22. Congress also then passed what they call the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and that provided some more money for rental relief, and it extended the deadline for CARES through the end of this calendar year, which is 2021. And then finally, the big one is the bill that just passed, the American Rescue Plan. We're expecting $670 million of direct aid to Baltimore City. We are, actively working on internally with the mayor and the senior team, figuring out what the funding priorities are and how we'll deploy that money. Those funds, we're not ready to announce how those funds will be spent yet, but we will have some sense of where we're heading on that when we send the final budget to the council. But clearly, there's a lot of work to do on that front. We won't have all those spending decisions done yet, but we will have the framework of how we're expecting to distribute those funds to best help us recover from COVID-19. In terms of the federal aid that we've gotten so far, I mentioned CARES. We're budgeting the remaining $24.5 million that's left in the fiscal 22 budget. We're also budgeting for $27.5 million of expected FEMA reimbursement in the fiscal 22 budget. And the city early on in the pandemic made a decision to try to access, we got a direct grant from the federal government for CARES, but we're also aggressively seeking other sources of aid, FEMA being the main one there. And on the next slide, a little bit more detail on CARES. So CARES, that remaining $24.5 million, $8 million will be used to support personnel that are dedicated to the pandemic. So in that case, we're thinking there, health personnel and fire EMS personnel. We are allowed to use that CARES money to support the people that are dedicated most of their tasks to combating the COVID-19 pandemic. We're also allowed to use the money for any other expenses that have come out of COVID-19. And because the pandemic is still continuing, even into fiscal 22, we're going to need to spend some money on additional technology upgrades, PPE purchases, cleaning and decontamination of our city buildings to make sure our workforce is safe, and some other costs. On the FEMA side, on the next slide, FEMA is reimbursing the city at a 100% rate for our mass vaccination sites. They are also reimbursing us for our food distribution and shelter programs that have been set up. Those programs were meant to help stop the spread of COVID-19, and as long as we meet that criteria, we believe that we'll continue to get that FEMA support. We will have to phase those programs out, of course, when the FEMA aid goes away. One other thing in terms of COVID-19 aid, we have a bunch of different sources that we're cobbling together for rental relief and eviction prevention services. So we spent $10 million already on rental relief and eviction prevention from that original CARES bill. But what you're seeing here is that there are other funding sources, either through federal sources, state sources, or local sources that we're cobbling together for an additional $31.2 million of funding for rental relief and eviction prevention. So, all in all, we have a very robust response to COVID-19. The federal government has been a lifeline, frankly, for us, because while our revenues were in a compromised state, were reduced, the federal government luckily has filled in and helped us to close that gap and keep us functioning in the meantime. And then finally, on the ARP, again, like I mentioned, anticipating $670 million. Don't see that in the preliminary budget because that announcement came late in the game, but we are working together as a team right now to figure out how we'll allocate that money and make sure that it has the most impact for Baltimore City. I'm going to pause there. I did just want to respond to one thing in the beginning of the message. I wanted to clarify the Youth Works, the comment that came up. There is not a cut to the Youth Works program this year. I think the comment came from the comptroller, and we'll be happy to share the detail with you. There was an unallocated grant funded last year, money that we never got, that we pulled out of the budget. We still expect to hit the 6,000 youth workers. That's our target for this summer. The program did change quite a bit because of the pandemic, so we had to reimagine what that would look like in a virtual setting, but we still are planning to do that. There is city support for that as well as grant support. The decline you were seeing in the budget was coming from an unallocated grant last year that we never received, that we took out of the fiscal 22 budget. So that's a little bit misleading, but again, I appreciate the question, and those are the kind of things that we can help clarify in events like this as we get those questions. That's it for me. I'll pause there so we can move on to the public comment part of the evening. And again, myself and my staff, even after this event, you're always welcome to reach out to us. You can see there's ways to reach us here through our website, via email, and also on Twitter and Facebook if you have any comments or want to learn more about the preliminary budget. Thanks again, and we look forward to hearing the comments.
Thank you, Director Cenamy. Thank you, Director Cenamy. Before we move to public testimony, are there any questions, comments, or concerns from members of the board? Mr. Mayor, Mr. Comptroller, Mr. Solicitor,
None here. I'm ready to hear from the public, Mr.
Mr.
President.
Director. All right, well, we'll turn it over to the public.
Mr. President, I wanted to take a moment and thank Mr. Cenamy for that clarification on the youth works budget. I am reassured to learn that
Sure thing.
it actually goes to my it actually goes to my comment that I do wish that it were possible to get greater detail sooner in the overall budget process. And I'm sorry that I had to find that out by being wrong. So in this case, I'm happy to be wrong, and I'm looking forward to having that program share in the increases in funding that I hope all of the youth development related programs and projects that the city does will share in over the course of the budget process. Thank you, Mr. President.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. And just for the edification of the general public, the board has had the opportunity to kind of review this for a couple weeks, as well as two presentations to date. This is the third time we've seen that from BBMR. So to the finance team, to BBMR folks, thank you so much for your commitment to working with us and providing us with the information. We will now move on to reasons that we're here, that we're gathered, and that's to receive testimony from members of the public. This is the most important part of this event, but really it's the most important part of this entire process. As always, members of this board are very interested in listening to the views and suggestions of the preliminary budget from the public. This is our opportunity to hear directly from you, the residents of Baltimore, and your opportunity to bring your concerns directly to your city officials, the Board of Estimates. Mayor James will operate the WebEx based off of the rules that we've talked about. At this time, I would like to go over those ground rules for this evening. As I said at the top, we want everyone's voice to be heard, and anyone who is disruptive or abusive may be asked to leave or ejected from the meeting. It's important that we respect one another. It's important that we have diverse discourse. It's important that we have disagreement. This is our budget. This is sanctity of the dollars that we spend and how we spend them. But we can do that in a respectful tone, and that's the expectation for tonight. If you have signed up to speak already, you will be called on and unmuted by one of our moderators when it's your turn to speak. If you wish to testify, please sign up at the link that you see on your screen right now. There's a link that we're going to put up. You just click on that link, and that's how you can sign up. When it's your turn to speak, you will have 2 minutes. Everybody will be given 2 minutes to provide their opinion, their comments, their concerns. Our moderators will let you know when your time has expired. The purpose of this evening is for us to listen. So we do not intend to enter into a dialogue or answer questions. If you are intending to speak, we suggest that you do the following. Find a quiet location with strong internet connections. Please state your first name, your last name, your neighborhood, and any affiliations before you begin to speak. Your 2 minutes will not start until you begin to speak. Participants who are not speaking will be muted at the end to make sure that we do not have a lot of background noise. Again, please speak slowly, clearly, and find a location that is quiet so the general public and the members of the Board of Estimates can hear you. If you wish to address the board but are not able to speak here tonight, you will still be able to submit a written or oral testimony through April the 30th. It's important for us to have this process be as transparent and accessible as possible. You can submit testimony at the web address that I mentioned earlier, or by email at taxpayer9, that's taxpayer9 at baltimorecity.gov. That's taxpayer9 at baltimorecity.gov. Or by voicemail for those who do not have internet access or email capabilities. You can leave a voicemail for us at 410-396-8873. That's 410-396-8873. All that we've been said, let's begin. The moderator, please call on the first speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. The first person signed up to speak this evening is Hannah Jackson from Bolton Hill. Who does not appear to be on the call at the moment. The next person signed up is Nika Namdi from Fight Blight Baltimore, and I will unmute them now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Good evening. My name is Nika Namdi. I'm a resident of Old West Baltimore and co-creator of Fight Blight Be More Stop Oppressive Seizures Fund. On this taxpayer night, I'm going to be covering some of the issues with the scheduled tax sale. More than 3,800 homeowners in Baltimore are at risk of being saddled with interest, attorney's fees, other fees, and foreclosure if they're unable to pay the debt below $750 by April 30th. The mayor has stated he has directed his team to do what is necessary to ensure that no homeowner loses their home to tax sale. Well then, we declare it necessary for the Director of Finance, Henry Raymond, to cancel this year's tax sale, especially because of the issues with accuracy and property tax billing and accounting. We have found the following errors to be common, particularly with this year's sale: property tax addresses with wrong zip codes, unapplied or misapplied property tax payments, misclassification of properties, and unapplied tax credit. One client of the SOS fund was found to have a billing discrepancy of over $180,000 on their account. Tell me again, how the city thinks it's appropriate to have a sale with these kind of glaring billing issues? Additionally, there appears to be $3.6 million sitting in the city's excess funds account. These funds are owed back to property owners after a tax sale foreclosure. Many of the owners owed these funds are defunct LLCs or nonprofits. I've asked representatives of the city and the state if the city can use those funds due to defunct owners to find and distribute remaining funds to people on the list, perform outreach for homeowners for property tax credit education and application, and to offer property tax austerity to the most vulnerable homeowners. But no one seems to have an answer, except that I should bring my question here. So I have, and I need to know if it can be done. Keep in mind that in last year's sale, $5 million in liens were sold on owner-occupied properties. Ensuring the accurate and equitable distribution. Okay, I'm just about finished. Of that fund will go to a long way to eliminate owner-occupied properties being on the sale this year. Thank you.
No, thank you.
The next person who signed up to testify is Amanda DeStefano from Bel Air Edison. Amanda, I'm going to unmute you now.
Hi, good evening. I'm just here to say that I fully agree with Comptroller Henry, and I would really like for Mayor Scott, as well as the City Council, to consider not increasing the city police budget this year. I really urge folks to understand that we cannot police our way out of poverty. Folks in our city need housing, they need job opportunities. We already have the highest per capita cost of police in the country, and we are continuing to increase funding for that department at the detriment of other departments. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. The next person on our list is Kyle Long from Better Waverly. I believe this is Mr. Long. I'm going to unmute you now. Okay, I do not think that was Mr. Long. The next person we have signed up is Ethan Hasick of Charles Village. I will unmute him now.
Hello, can you hear me? Honorable members of the Board of Estimates, my name is Ethan Hasick. I live in Charles Village, and I'm here testifying on behalf of Jews United for Justice, JUFJ. JUFJ organizes more than 1,600 people in the city to support local social, racial, and economic justice issues. Jewish tradition demands of us, choose life so that you may live. We are disappointed that the fiscal year 2022 Baltimore City preliminary budget continues a pattern of divesting and underinvesting from that which gives life to our communities, while increasing investments in policing and punishment that take life away. As such, we are here to support the demands of our coalition partners in the campaign for justice, safety, and jobs. First, we demand a $100 million cut from BPD's existing budget. The increases to police funding in this budget are unacceptable. Second, we demand a $30 million investment into Community Wellness Trust Fund that should be governed through a participatory budgeting process. Third, we demand a $70 million additional investment to support quality, affordable housing, high quality public education, universal health care, jobs, a universal basic income, and community programs. Finally, we demand the removal of police entirely from responses to mental health distress, substance use, sex work, homelessness, and other quality of life issues. We demand that Baltimore create an alternative to 911 that does not dispatch police in order to connect people in crisis with mental health, housing, treatment, and harm reduction resources that they need to live with dignity. Mayor Scott, Controller Henry, and President Mosby, we commend you for your statements expressing openness to reconsidering police funding in favor of life-giving services. However, this proposed budget increases the BPD budget. We can no longer delay moving in the right direction. We respectfully urge you, the Board of Estimates, to adjust this budget to invest in Black, brown, and low-income communities, not in policing them. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker this evening is Mr. Dan Richmond, and I will unmute him now.
Thank you, members of the board and estimates and staff. My name is Dan Richmond. I live in the Patterson Park neighborhood in Council District 1. I am testifying in support of substantially decreasing funding for the police department and reallocating to increase funding for community-based safety programs, youth programs, affordable housing, other constructive services. Frankly, I'm sick of having so much of my tax dollars spent on the police and still needing workarounds for public safety because that police department is so destructive and ineffective for most of the problems we actually face. For one example, I'm currently volunteering with other members of my neighborhood and district to implement public safety programs that avoid calling the police. This is because we don't want children or adults swept into the incarceration system. We want skillful and nonviolent ways of responding to behavioral and substance abuse issues. And we want problems solved by community members, and we don't want the criminalization of poverty. So the city is working against us when it hardly funds the scale of community-based safety programs that we need, and instead it funds the police department that is worsening the problems that we're trying to solve. That's all I have for today. I'll yield the rest of my time. Thank you for your time.
Okay, the next person signed up to testify is Mr. William Lassane, and I will unmute him now.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say that I agree with all the testimony that's been given today. I think that we cannot, as everyone said, police our way out of the issues that we face that are systemic and historical. And I think that we need to reallocate over $100 million of the police budget to other things that work. We need to get away from being trauma-informed, but more healing-centered. And I think that so many other programs like schools, housing, need funding, and we can't direct this funding to the police. Thank you so much. I yield back my time.
The next person signed up to speak is Lyda Langford, and I will unmute them at this time.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening. My name is Lyda Langford, and I'm a resident of Mount Vernon. After a year of demonstrations from Baltimore City residents demanding that the Baltimore Police be defunded, it's clear that our voices have not been heard. Our tax dollars should be used to aid and support our communities, not to fund a corrupt and violent organization that terrorizes and brutalizes our Black and brown neighbors. The people of Baltimore need safe and secure housing, healthcare, school, daycare, public parks, and better access to nutritious food. To deny our most vulnerable neighbors those essentials while funneling even more of our money into the unending cycle of oppression that is the Baltimore Police Department is worse than bad leadership. It is violence. Mayor Scott, you have stated during your tenure, you hope to restore the public's trust in government and change Baltimore for the better. This is an opportunity for you. Thank you.
The next person signed up is Elam Bukvar Klein from Old Goucher, and I will unmute them now.
Good evening, Board of Estimates members. Thank you for providing me the chance to speak. My name is Elam Bukvar Klein, and I am a resident of the Old Goucher neighborhood in Council District 12. And echoing those who've spoken before, I'm testifying in support of reducing BPD funding by at least 25% of its current budget and reinvesting those funds in community-based solutions that we know will boost the health of residents across our neighborhoods. This is urgent, and I know this from what I've observed firsthand. I work with middle schoolers at a nonprofit organization in Southwest Baltimore. We provide a safe, healthy environment for our students to learn, play, and build relationships with one another. Students share insights on homework, help with math problems, and play kickball in the field across the street. But sometimes a patrol car sits in that parking lot next to that field. And it's striking to see how the students' dispositions change when the police surveil next to their play and learning space. They become more tense and distant, with one student even remarking to me, "I don't want the police here," and then running back inside. Their fear, undoubtedly due to run-ins they've observed or even had between officers and parents, relatives, siblings, friends, impedes their ability to comfortably learn and play, their ability to be kids, because they're suddenly in survival mode, the color of their skin making them a potential target. Now, their fear is justified. This reality is not. It's unconscionable that we spend $840 on police per capita, more than any other large city in the country, more than double what we spend on schools, and triple what we spend on housing and community development. We know what needs to be done to create opportunity in our communities. That's invest in schools, mental health services, workforce development programs, youth services, just to name a few. And so to all of the Board of Estimates members, in this political moment of heightened awareness, we have an opportunity, a unique opportunity to do just that. We must invest in our youth and not the institution that instills fear in their play spaces. Thank you very much for the time.
The next speaker will be Caitlin Goldblatt, and I will unmute them now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. My name is Caitlin Goldblatt, and I'm testifying as a member of Scan the Police and the Greater Baltimore chapter of the Democratic Socialist of America's Housing Justice Committee. Over the weekend, dozens of Baltimore City police officers from multiple districts were deployed for a small youth-led protest in solidarity with those protesting police brutality elsewhere. On that particular day, the Department of Public Works, a grossly underfunded agency, their trucks were called off their recycling routes hours before the protest even began and were diverted to the Baltimore Police Department's headquarters downtown. For hours, the police department utilized these trucks to blockade their headquarters and the entrance to IV3. The police also utilized both their helicopter and one owned by the Maryland State Police to follow a group of mostly children around. The entire time, police kept dozens of cops outfitted in riot gear in wait and had barricades up that no one has ever really tried to breach. The police response was a repeat of panicked, wholly unnecessary police responses in the face of demonstrations in Baltimore for years. For several years now, I've worked both professionally and as an organizer to assist tenants facing eviction, house those experiencing homelessness, and promote policies that would reduce harm caused by inadequate protections for low-income renters and homeowners alike. I have put myself between landlords attempting to punch their tenants in rent court, and I have seen the harm done by civil court judges so slanted in favor of landlords that they have ignored city codes requiring landlords to have registered rental properties. I've worked with tenants on public housing vouchers whose calls for city council members to care about the rats, flooding, and carbon monoxide deaths in their homes have been met with gaslighting. I've met children poisoned by the lead in buildings the city has sold to developers at tax sales that make people homeless. And all this time, I've listened to tenants tell me all the different ways in which cops have been of no assistance to them.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
I'm here to ask you to defund the Baltimore City Police Department's bloated budget of over $500 million and certainly not increase that amount as the current budget threatens to do. Instead, please think of our communities and commit to funding the full lead abatement of Baltimore City, land trusts that would help ensure more Baltimore communities own the homes around them, the improvement of uninhabitable conditions at public housing complexes in the city, the permanent housing of our neighbors experiencing homelessness, and both security deposit and rental assistance for tenants, at least until such time as the city implements actual rent control laws. Thank you.
The next person to speak will be Terrence Fitzgerald, and I will unmute him at this time.
This is Dr. Terry Fitzgerald from Mount Washington. I have been practicing medicine in Baltimore for 36 years, and I am a member of Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility. I wish to emphasize that housing is health. The excessive funds pouring into policing are not creating a safer and more secure environment. Nonetheless, this proposed budget provides $27 million more to the police than the last budget as amended. I support the call to remove 25% of the proposed budget for police and dedicate that money to activities that truly create public safety. Good housing is critical for good health. As a physician, I see that every day. Over the years, city officials have never truly taken this seriously. The health of our city and the health of its citizens demand a commitment to and a focus on dealing with the problems of housing in Baltimore City. Poor housing conditions are associated with respiratory infections, asthma, injuries, lead poisoning, and mental health problems. Asthma is a particularly serious example of how poor housing can threaten lives. But in this short time, I want to emphasize the problem of lead in our city. The burden of lead in our housing is a well-recognized and well-ignored topic. Seriously addressing this danger requires intense commitment and focus. We must face up to this problem, seriously evaluate it, and fight for the funds to address it. The effects of lead on cognition, behavior, and development are generally irreversible and in fact contribute to crime in our city. The costs to the individual and the costs to society are immeasurable, yet we continue to ignore it. I call on the city to lead the way by taking excess resources currently given to the police department and committing them to the study of the lead burden and how to address it. This should be a major undertaking, not just a small study. This work could, in fact, create momentum to act on a national scale. It is time to take this seriously and to take action for true public safety. Thank you.
The next speaker will be Charlie Cooper of Get Money Out, Maryland. And I will unmute him at this time.
Okay, well, thank you for calling and look for an email from me.
Mr. Cooper?
Oh, yes. Oh, great. Perfect. Thank you. I'm Charlie Cooper. I'm president of Get Money Out Maryland, an all-volunteer organization that was established just over 8 years ago. We've signed up more than 9,000 citizen supporters, working towards the goal that all citizens should have equal access to the ballot and an equal say in governments. We're urging the mayor to appropriate money to allow the Fair Campaign Finance Fund to begin functioning. This is what the voters want. And I'm sure you're going to have more witnesses talking about this and more written testimony. I've submitted written. But I just want to highlight an aspect of this that many people may not think about. The United States has endured several decades of the vicious cycle of big money campaign financing, high dollar lobbying, and policies that promote economic inequality. And so the rich had already gotten way richer before the pandemic. And now we've learned that 660 US billionaires have gained $1.3 trillion. That's just 660 people just during the pandemic in the last 13 months. And also, the bottom 90% of the whole US population only has about 20% of the wealth. So we face the danger that one or more outside billionaires could intervene in Baltimore's elections in the future and change the direction of our city entirely. They could use independent spending and dark money without disclosure. They wouldn't even have to contribute to anyone's campaign to dominate. So this threatens to destroy our system of democracy. The Fair Campaign Financing Fund gives a broader swath of people the chance to be candidates and a broader swath of people the chance to impact the election by giving $5 or $10 or $100. It costs about $4 per resident per year, as opposed to the police that costs $850 per resident per year and seems to do about as much harm as good. So please find $2.5 million a year to start putting money in this fund. I want to just say a personal note. I live in Cold Spring, Newtown. I've lived in Baltimore City about 52 years. And I agree with all the people that we've got to reduce the budget for the police and start redirecting it to the schools and other appropriate services. Thank you very much.
The next speaker will be Melissa Schober of Harwood, and I will unmute her now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Melissa.
Thank you. More than 10 years ago, in FY11, Baltimore began outcome-based budgeting. The FY22 budget presented by Mayor Scott reminds us on page 18 that although the process of budgeting has evolved, the underlying principle remains the same: to get the best use of city resources that achieve the best results for residents. Sadly, it appears this principle has been abandoned, again, still. This year's budget increases funding for the BPD. Setting aside the pressing questions of whether we ought to continue funding an agency empowered to carry out state violence in our name, I am focusing on the technocratic, as calls to defund to refund and appeals to moral imperatives seem to fall on deaf ears. Performance audits of FY16 and 17 of the BPD noted an absence of written policies and procedures that contribute to weak internal controls and cause deficiencies in effectiveness of operations. The very next performance audit, FY18 and 19, noted the exact same findings. The BPD lacks written policies and procedures to document its own performance measures, maintain documentation. At that time, according to the BPD, policies and procedures were being updated as part of the consent decree. However, the audit noted that the policies and procedures did not address the finding of the prior recommendation. In FY16, at the time of the first audit, the BPD's budget was $487 million. Your recommendation for FY22 is a $69 million increase over that number, and comes even with these repeat audit findings, and even with the failure to meet performance metrics and soften targets, as we saw in FY21 that lowered expectations for recruitment and discourteous complaints. The ready response is one we know all too well. A weak agency demands more resources to reform and improve, and I would generally tend to agree as long as the largesse was coupled with oversight, but we don't have that. Instead, we have an agency in which officers are allowed and encouraged to be profligate with OT so long as they get results, which is how we get the GTTF and how we'll get whatever comes next, since this preliminary budget outlines 4 key results for public safety, only one of which is specific to the BPD, which is to increase the number of search warrants to 1,100. Except that's hardly an increase given that in FY19, the department recorded 1,083. The new target is an increase of less than 2%. It should not be possible for a moral mayor to claim he embraces the best, highest use of our precious and scarce revenue on page 12 of the preliminary budget while increasing the budget for an agency that is floundering and expected to achieve only modest increases pages later. We could be defunding an agency that willfully and continuously refuses to provide basic documentation in favor of any number of evidence-based and promising practices, many of which could themselves leverage federal matching funds via Medicaid. But we aren't. The budget values the familiar over the technocratic, and I regret my vote for you, Mr. Mayor.
The next person signed up to testify is Jonathan Smitten. I will unmute them now.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I'll take that as a yes.
Hey, Jonathan, we can hear you.
Honorable members, excellent. Honorable members of the Board of Estimates, thank you for taking the time to hear from your constituents tonight. My name is John Smitten, and I'm speaking here today from my home in Better Waverly as a 9-year resident of Baltimore City, a data analyst, and a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice Baltimore, working in collaboration with the Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs. I ask that you divest $100 million from the over $500 million Baltimore Police Department budget and redirect those funds to transparent and accountable community-led solutions that address the root causes of crime. In addition, I ask that you create a trust that communities can dictate where and how the money is reinvested. In fiscal year 2021, Baltimore spent over $139,000 per cop for the year. At that rate, one Safe Street site could be funded at the cost of 4 police officers. This shows it costs much more to respond to violence than it does to prevent it. One other note that I want to make in response to the comments of Mayor Scott on this exact topic, if we are concerned that the first thing the BPD would cut in their budget, if their budget was reduced, are the legally mandated efforts to minimize unconstitutional policing as outlined in the consent decree, then that speaks more to how misplaced the priorities of the police are than how justified the desires of the people are. Finally, as a member of Surge Baltimore, I stand in solidarity with Baltimore Safe Haven and their demands for financial support for LGBTQ folks experiencing homelessness, access to building from the city, grant funds for trans-led orgs to provide direct services, and the creation of an LGBTQ office in City Hall. Thank you for your time.
Okay, the next person signed up is Sahida Chandu, and I will unmute them now.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, Shanita, we can hear you.
Yes, hi. My name is Sajida Chandu. I live in Mount Vernon, and I'm the Canvas Director at Clean Water Action. We're a national environmental organization with over 6,000 members in Baltimore City. I'm here today to speak on a couple of items in the budget proposal relevant to sewage infrastructure. So the preliminary budget plan allocates $2.5 million for the new sewage on-site support program to disinfect people's homes after a sewage backup. While it's great that this money is budgeted, the parameters of this program need to change so that the money is actually used to help those that it is meant for. The policies for this program are based on a reimbursement program that the city has had for 3 years, but those policies were so strict that they resulted in only a handful of households getting help and a tiny fraction of the money budgeted actually being used. For example, in fiscal year 2019, only 18% of applicants to the reimbursement program were accepted. That's only 11 households. And although $2 million was set aside in the budget for this program, the city only used around $10,000 of it. Second, sewer backups have not trended down over the past few years. We'd like to see more funds focused on bringing this number down. We're really concerned that the number of sewer backups into homes is not used as an indicator for healthy communities. The amount of fecal bacteria into waterways is used, but those two things don't necessarily go together, and sewage in people's homes has a much bigger impact on people's health. Funds should be focused on reducing the number of backups Baltimore residents have to deal with. And lastly, I just wanted to echo what everyone has been saying today about divesting funds from BPD. We need to make sure that we're reallocating funds towards things that will actually keep people safe and healthy. Thank you.
No, thank you. Matt, before we move on, it's 7:12. We're going to ask folks who are participating tonight, if you have not done so and you would like to speak tonight, to provide your 2 minutes worth of testimony, please utilize the website that is up on the screen right now. That's bit.ly/. LY/FY22 Taxpayers. Please utilize that link to sign up. We will turn that link off at 7:30, but it's wide open for anyone who would like to sign up and testify tonight. Thank you for that, Matt. We can go on to the next person.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next person signed up to speak is John Kern, and I will unmute them now.
Hey there, my name is John Kern. I'm down in Pigtown. I work at the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service, and I'm one of the co-creators of the SOS Fund, the Stop Oppressive Seizures Fund. So the fund has raised nearly 50 grand in small donations from residents to help pay the property tax bills of their neighbors so that they don't lose their homes to tax sale. So I've spoken to each of the 20 homeowners who are going to receive these funds so that they can avoid the sale and they don't have to return the money. Many of the legacy residents wept on the phone as we offered them this relief. The incredible trauma and stress brought on by the sale was finally lifted. Thousands of residents are still in this same danger. Please try and remember, taxation is the fiscal representation of civic engagement. These residents are engaged. We would be lost without their contributions. We've got to work with these legacy residents who are the lifeblood of our communities to ensure that they're supported as they continue to do their part in our communities. We cannot place an opportunistic and patently racist investment scheme ahead of their interests. So we are calling for the immediate cancellation of this year's tax sale, followed by aggressive reform of the entire system. This is the time to transform our method of debt collection into a fiscally responsible, just, and equitable system. Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you.
The next person registered to speak is Elizabeth Rossi, and I will unmute them now.
Hi, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Ms. Rossi.
Thank you. Hi, good evening. My name is Elizabeth Rossi. Thank you for taking the time to hear from your constituents tonight. I am testifying as a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice Baltimore in support and collaboration with the Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs to ask that you divest $100 million from the over $500 million Baltimore Police Department budget and redirect those funds to transparent and accountable community-led solutions that address the root causes of crime. In addition, I ask that you create a trust through which communities can dictate where and how that money is reinvested. I grew up in the Idlewood and Cedarcroft neighborhoods of Baltimore City and recently moved to Mount Washington. I work as an attorney with a civil rights nonprofit based in DC called Civil Rights Corps. We litigate cases across the country challenging racist and oppressive practices like money bail, private probation, and policing. Through this work, I have seen firsthand the devastating effects of policing, including the trauma that occurs after an arrest, when parents are separated from children, when medical care is interrupted, and when human beings are taken away from their homes, jobs, families, and communities. For decades, Baltimore has invested more and more money in a punishment bureaucracy that does not make us safer and is itself violent and unsafe. Instead of throwing good money after bad and giving additional funding to expand technology and personnel that will be used to further police already over-policed communities, money should be invested in after-school programs, crisis centers, medical care, substance abuse treatment, youth centers, and many more community-centered programs that will actually address public safety and community concerns. It is for these reasons that I ask you to divest $100 million at least from the Baltimore Police Department budget and redirect those funds to transparent and accountable community-led solutions that address the root causes of crime, including a trust that communities can dictate where and how the money is reinvested. Finally, as a member of Surge Baltimore, I stand in solidarity with Baltimore Safe Haven and their demands for financial support for LGBTQ folks experiencing homelessness, access to a building from the city, grant funds for trans-led organizations to provide direct services, and the creation of an LGBTQ office in City Hall. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person registered to testify is Edith Lopez Estrada. Unmute them right now.
Hello? Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You can begin.
Okay. My name is Edith Lopez Estrada, and I live in Park Heights neighborhood. And I'm in support of Organized Black's demands for the 22 city budget. These are the demands we have. We demand that $100 million be cut from BPD's budget. We demand a $30 million investment into Community Wellness Trust Fund to be governed through a participatory budgeting process. We demand that $70 million be allocated to support quality, affordable housing, high-quality public education, universal health care, jobs, and a universal basic income and community programs. We also demand the removal of police entirely from the responses to mental health distress, substance use, sex work, and homelessness, and other quality of life issues. Despite the continued rate of opioid overdose deaths, the budget for mental health substances stayed virtually the same, which is $4.7 million or 1% of the BPD budget. There was a great increase in emergency medical services, but again, this waiting until bad things happen instead of caring for the health and wellness of our communities. As a taxpayer, I do not approve of your proposed city budget, and I believe that it is a terrible use of our city funding, and expect that the city meets our community's needs and demands, which is to defund the police and reallocate those fundings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person signed up to testify is Namita Money, and maybe the same person, but I will unmute them now.
Hi, thank you. My name is Namita, and I live in Park Heights. I am in support of the Organized Black demands for the 2022 city budget, and these demands are the following. We demand that $100 million be cut from BPD's budget. The constant growth of BPD's budget has not correlated into a decrease in crime or harm and has only fed surveillance and police violence in Black and Brown communities. We demand the creation of a community wellness trust fund. We demand a $30 million investment into a community wellness trust fund to be governed through a participatory budgeting process. Baltimoreans are more than capable of identifying what public safety looks like without increased police presence or surveillance tools. We demand investment in Black communities. We demand that $70 million be allocated to support quality, affordable housing, high-quality public education, universal health care, jobs, a universal basic income, and community programs. The proposed FY22 budget cuts $15 million from our public schools and education grants. Black children deserve a high-quality education, not incarceration and punishment. We demand the removal of police entirely from response to mental health distress, substance use, sex work, homelessness, and other quality of life issues. We demand Baltimore create an alternative to 911 that does not dispatch police to connect people in crisis with the mental health, house, treatment, and/or harm reduction resources they need to live with dignity. The role of the police is too expansive. There are better ways to meet many of the functions that they serve without armed police. As a taxpayer, I do not approve of your proposed 2022 city budget. And please defund the police. Thank you.
The next person signed up to testify is Carrie Nye. I think I have found Carrie in the attendee list, and I will unmute them now.
Hi, thank you. Good evening. My name is Carrie Nye. I'm a resident of Waverly. I'm speaking tonight to urge the city to scrap the proposed $27.6 million increase in funding for BPD. I'm a longtime city resident and a homeowner, and I strenuously disagree with how my taxpayer dollars are being spent. I favor defunding the police entirely in order to reinvest in Baltimore's Black and Brown communities. I was dismayed to read through the budget document that you frame public safety as the absence of crime as opposed to the presence of well-funded and community-centered programs and services. The proposed $27 million increase in BPD funding is $27 million that continues to be diverted from safe housing, from functional infrastructure, and from local job creation. And I just want to point out that with the Youth Works discussion that happened earlier in the meeting, that sure, a grant didn't come through for the program, but the city is actively making a decision not to fill the funding gap. It has the same effect as a budget cut, so let's not diminish the city's agency in allowing this and other funding gaps to stand unchallenged. Residents have been tireless in our effort to ask you to reimagine public safety with us. I urge you to please refrain from increasing BPD's budget. Better yet, cut it significantly. I'm hearing $100 million is a pretty popular place to start tonight, so that sounds good to me. And launch a community wellness trust fund to try to reconcile the harm caused by past and present city policies such as redlining, urban renewal, and residential tax sales. At a time of historically significant loss of life and lessened quality of life, underinvesting in citizens cannot possibly be the answer that this government chooses. Thank you for your attention, for your consideration.
The next person signed up to testify is Barbara Hauk. I will unmute them at this time.
Good evening, members of the Board of Estimates. Thank you for taking time to listen to your constituents tonight. My name is Barbara Hauk. I am testifying as a member of Showing Up for Racial Justice Baltimore to ask that you divest $100 million from the over $500 million Baltimore Police Department budget and redirect those funds to transparent and accountable community-led solutions that address the root causes of crime. I also ask that you create a trust so communities can dictate where and how that money is reinvested. I'm speaking here today as a longtime Baltimore City resident and proud homeowner in the Mayfield neighborhood. I'm a member of Surge Baltimore's legislative team as well as an organizer for District 43. Surge works in collaboration with the Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs. I am also a survivor of rape. The first time it happened, the officer who took my report asked me why I had gone to the party. The second time it happened, the officer who came to the emergency room asked me if I really wanted to go through with filing a police report because it was just a case of he said, she said. The third time it happened, I didn't bother to call the police. Now, whether you think I'm irresponsible or unlucky is irrelevant. The bottom line is the role of police in our society is far too expansive. There is no good reason to send a person with a gun and arrest powers to handle a victim of gender-based violence or any other situation where a crime has already occurred. It is for these reasons that I ask you to divest $100 million from the BPD budget and redirect those funds to community-led solutions as previously outlined. Finally, as a woman who can't sit properly on chairs and a member of Surge Baltimore, I stand in solidarity with Baltimore Safe Haven in their demands for financial support for LGBTQ folks experiencing homelessness, access to a building from the city, grant funds for trans-led organizations to provide direct services, and the creation of an LGBTQ office in City Hall. Thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you.
The next person scheduled to testify is Brittany Frazier, and I will unmute them at this time.
Hi, Brittany Frazier of Beverly Hills. I'm testifying to ask that you divest at least $100 million from the Baltimore Police Department budget and to reallocate those funds to social programs that provide truly comprehensive community care and reduce our reliance on policing. I'm particularly interested in seeing this funding directed toward the creation of free, easily accessible, and high-quality childcare for children ages birth to 5 years old. The availability of high-quality early childhood education would go far to build social equity in our city. It would also fill a gap in services for homeless families and set Baltimore apart for job-seeking young professionals. I'd also like to stand in solidarity with Baltimore Safe Haven's demands for LGBTQ leadership and directing funds to services for LGBTQ folks experiencing homelessness, prejudice, and a constant threat of violence. Please open up grant funding for Baltimore Safe Haven and other LGBTQ nonprofits that are doing life-saving work. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
The next person to testify will be Anna Bickers, and I will unmute her at this time.
Hey, good evening. My name is Anna Bickers, and I live in Mount Vernon. I want to echo what a lot of folks have said tonight. BPD's budget is slated to increase by over 27 million as stated in the preliminary budget, up from over 500 million in fiscal year 2021. That's half of the total proposed budget for the recommendation of building public safety. The only key result listed that BPD plans to contribute to the public safety priority, according to the preliminary budget, is increasing the number of search warrants obtained in 2022. An increase in repressive policies would not only be ineffective, but more importantly, these repressive policies result in the loss of life of Baltimore City citizens at the hands of police. We've seen no evidence to suggest that BPD can be held accountable for their actions, much less reformed. I urge the Board of Estimates and City Council to reallocate funding from BPD to other community supports like social services and education, which can begin to undermine the structural racism upon which the criminal justice system is built. Similar to fiscal year 2021, some social services and community building supports are facing cuts in 2022. I call on the Board of Estimates not just to reallocate the currently planned $27 million increase in funding for BPD, but to continue to divest further from BPD this year and every year until the institutions and programs that allow Baltimore citizens to thrive are funded to the fullest extent. The time to reimagine what public safety looks like in Baltimore City is long overdue, and we can't continue to support this failing and homicidal institution with bloated budgets that grow every year. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person scheduled to testify is Sandy Robeson, and I will unmute them at this time. Sandy Robeson? Okay, the next person scheduled to testify is Robert Farrell, and I will unmute them at this time.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Robert.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you for having me tonight. My name is Rob Farrell. I'm a senior organizer with Organizing Black, and I'm working directly with the Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs. I live in Bolton Hill on the west side. I organize for racial justice, especially around the ways police interact with our community. When I talk to Black residents of Baltimore, like a broken record, I hear that folks want a greater say in how their tax money is spent. So I would echo Mr. Henry's comments earlier about greater participation in the process and releasing data sooner and soon as possible, really, so that residents can provide greater feedback in detail. And the bottom line is, what I hear from our folks is that they don't see the help and assistance that they need, right? But they do see an occupying military force patrolling their communities, repeatedly violating their constitutional rights, incarcerating them, their friends, and their family, mostly for nonviolent offenses. So I'm here to present Organizing Black's demands, which you've probably heard a few times by now. Number one is we demand a $100 million cut from BPD's budget. The constant growth of BPD's budget has not correlated into a decrease in crime and has only fed the surveillance state and increase in harm in our Black and brown communities on behalf of the police. We spend more per capita than any city, major city in the country, and by that logic, Baltimore should be the safest city in the country, and we are far from that. The time is now to find different solutions, community-led solutions. And so that leads me to the second demand, which is to create a community wellness trust fund. We should take $30 million of that $100 million and invest it into a community wellness trust fund that is governed through a participatory budgeting process. Again, to echo Mr. Henry's point, this would be a process in which Baltimoreans can have a direct say in how the money is spent and the solutions that they want to create greater public safety. Again, take the $70 million, the remaining $70 million and invest in Black communities. We need affordable housing, high quality public education, universal health care, jobs, universal basic income, and community programming. Remove police entirely from the mental health responses to mental health distress, substance use, sex work, homelessness, and other quality of life issues. The role of policing is far too expansive. Police will even tell you that themselves, and I know you know this. So let's stop pussyfooting around the issue and take the money away as soon as possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, our next person slated to testify is Raleigh Hayes, and I will unmute them at this time.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So my name is Raleigh Hayes, and I'm the Deputy Director of Organizing Black. I am also a lifelong 9th District Baltimore resident, and I'm sure I'm a familiar voice to most of you. So it should come as no surprise that I say that I've attended almost every single Taxpayers Night since 2007. And ever since then, we've asked for funding to be dedicated to the things we know that can make our city great. The reason most of you are sitting in your seats is because people believe that is what you want to do. So now is the time to take a stance, to make some choices, and to do the things that people are asking you to do. I'm not going to repeat the demands because I'm sure you've heard them. I've also submitted them as written testimony. I invite you to have conversations about how we can make this a reality sooner rather than later. 5 years is not enough. It's too long of a time. We have to make things happen now. People are dying every day. A young girl died yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person signed up to testify is Britney Johnstone, and I will unmute them now. Ms. Johnstone?
Ms. Johnstone, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. She sent a message in the chat. I believe she submitted written testimony. The next person to sign up is Miss Kim Trueheart, and I will unmute her at this time.
Good evening, everyone. My testimony tonight is about how disingenuous this process is. Several years ago, the power decided that they would not interact with those giving testimony. I think that's a cop-out. I think you all are being cowards to start dying. $27 million is no reason. You know, whether they need it or not. Pay this budget. Pay advertising our youth. It reduces 0.4%. Safety increased by 9 dollars. That's disingenuous. What you do is wrong, and putting money in public safety is the exact opposite. of what we want. Right now, I'm looking for change. This seems like the same old routine. You screw us over, you spend money on the police, and it is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trueheart.
Okay, the next person signed up to testify is Rachel Warren, and I will unmute Rachel at this time.
Hi there. As a 10-year Baltimore resident, a taxpayer, a small business owner, a mother of two, both kids born here in the city, and attend public schools in Baltimore City, and as someone who both loves the city and knows the extreme disparities between white residents and Black and brown residents, adding any more money to the police budget is reprehensible at best. Study after study show that more policing and more money added to the budget for policing does not make the most marginalized of a city any safer. More policing only adds to the terror, brutality, and militarized state where no person should have to try to survive and thrive in. We should not have to beg our city budget makers and our mayor to stop putting millions and millions of dollars toward a punitive and carceral force that only produces more crime against its own citizens. You have the choice to make Baltimore a leader in showing that there's another way, that our taxpayers' money can be used to fund actual positive outcome producing steps, better and safer schools without police inside those school walls, safer and healthier housing, more job opportunities, health. Baltimore have been working towards defunding for years, and the time is now. Black children and residents of Baltimore deserve more, and you have the power to do so. Do not let this opportunity pass yet again to do the least with the most dire consequences. Thank you, guys.
Okay, at this time, we're going to go back to Sandy Robeson. She had been called earlier and missed her name, but I'm going to go ahead and unmute Ms. Robeson now.
Sorry. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sandy.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sandy Robson, and I'm also part of Showing Up for Racial Justice Baltimore, which organizes white communities to confront white supremacy by supporting organizing that's led by people of color. And Surge is working in collaboration with the Campaign for Justice, Safety, and Jobs. And I'm also adding my voice to the chorus of people here who are asking to defund the police by $100 million. I think that it's really time to, this is an unprecedented year, and we're looking for visionary leadership. So we're looking for folks to fund transparent and accountable community-led solutions to address the root causes of crime, to create the Community Wellness Fund, and to find other solutions to all of these problems that don't necessarily need police to intervene. And I also stand with Baltimore Safe Haven in supporting, seeking support for LGBTQ folks who are experiencing homelessness, access to a building from the city, to grant funds, and to the creation of an LGBTQ office at City Hall. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person on our sign-up list is Emily Cornett. And I will unmute Emily now.
Hi everyone, my name's Emily. I'm a resident of 10 Hills, and I don't know if I can say it any better than it's already been said, but I just want to echo Organizing Black's demands to defund the Baltimore Police Department, and the same thing about at least $100 million redistributed to a $30 million community wellness trust fund, $70 million in various community funds, and that crisis alternative to 911. Police are responsible for routine anti-Black and brown violence and brutality, and they also have very low clearance rates and do little to stop the crime from happening in the first place. They're ineffective because they don't address the root causes of harm, and instead of trying to just catch and lock up individual people that we're labeling as criminals, we have to consider and address the broader conditions that perpetuate crime. I'm a social work intern in a public defender's office, and every single case that I've worked on could have been prevented if the people involved had not been failed by the systems we have in place, and if they had had access to the support they needed, whether that be, I'm sorry, my cat is in the background, mental health treatment or housing or just a livable wage. And people whose basic needs are met and who are not being marginalized are less likely to commit crimes rooted in desperation or trauma. So I don't know how we can expect things to get better if we keep punishing people who are trying to cope and survive with a lack of community resources, because you can't arrest away and lock away those problems. And I also want to add that community policing and training and more initiatives that give more money to the police are not the answer either. Healing and growth requires redistributing police funds to invest in the health and well-being of our communities. Thank you.
Okay, the next person on the list is Onyinye Alhiri, and I will unmute them at this time.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, staff and members of the Board of Estimates. My name is Onyinye. I live in Upton and grew up in the village, both places where cops crawl through our streets and our schools like rats. Last year, we all bore witness to an international uprising in which people took to the streets and demanded that we defund the police. In the last few days and weeks, we have witnessed several Black and Latino people killed by police officers, including 16-year-old Micaiah Bryant in Ohio and 13-year-old Alex Toledo in Chicago, and another child yesterday. It could not be clearer that policing is a public health hazard. The proposed $27 million increase overshadows the measly $21 million you cut from the budget last year. I support the demand for a $100 million decrease in BPD's budget, but also a gradual and complete dismantling of the department as we build alternative structures. Policing and incarceration do not keep us safe. There have been many studies showing that adequate education, affordable, stable housing, a living wage, and access to health services are better at reducing and preventing violence and harm than police or prisons. 10 years ago, the city had the lowest homicide rate we've seen since the 70s, and the budget wasn't even half of what is being proposed in the 2022 fiscal year. Every year, the police budget increases, and every year, the homicide rate hits a new record, as well as the overdose rate in our city, which is 3 times the homicide rate, even as our population continues to plummet. On its own, the amount of money being spent on policing is ridiculous, but when compared to the amount being spent on other necessities, it's even more absurd. We spend pennies to the dollar for fundamental services compared to what we give to a department that has demonstrated its inability to prevent harm in our communities, including gun violence, intimate partner violence, opioid overdose, hunger, homelessness, and other social ailments. We do not want more money to the police to improve their training. We want our tax dollars to be used to address really dire problems in our communities, especially in East, West, and South Baltimore, where many people are struggling and live impacted by economic and social disinvestment. Instead of continuing to funnel money to BPD for perks and retirement, we can use that money to fund our schools and childcare, develop and strengthen mobile crisis services, peer counseling, crisis hotlines, conflict mediation, affordable housing, eviction prevention, land stewardship. The list goes on and on. To proceed with this budget tells us that you do not care about the needs and demands of the people. If you want to create more trauma, by all means, keep funding the police. If you want to create holistically healthy and safe communities, It's time for a transformative change. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The next person signed up to testify is Jillian Waldo, and I will unmute them at this time.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Ms. Waldo.
Oh, thank you. So the proposed budget for BPD this year will increase by $27.6 million. And the reason that's given is a required increase in the city's contribution for the fire and police pension program. But surely there are other places in BPD's $555.5 million budget that could be cut. On page 7 of this budget, BPD is explicitly referred to as a financial liability, noting that the city is increasingly facing claims from wrongful imprisonments and gun trace task force misconduct. The city continues to spend millions of dollars on these settlements. Why should taxpayers who are regularly terrorized and threatened by police officers, many of whom don't live in the city limits, be forced to pay for the police's brutality and misdeeds? Baltimore City residents must bear the physical, emotional, legal, and financial burden that BPD wreaks on the city daily. Additionally, on page 62 of the preliminary budget, there's a call for increasing the funding for the MONSE program that offers residents financial incentives to install home security cameras and register them with City Watch. Police officers can request footage if crimes occur near these cameras, essentially weaponizing citizens against each other and incentivizing a police state where everyone is monitored at all times. I would strongly urge the city not to continue to pursue this initiative. Last year, for fiscal year 2021, the City Council voted to cut $22 million from BPD's budget, which amounted to cuts to the mountain and marine units, overtime, and unallocated funds. This year, the City Council now has the power to reallocate funds in the budget instead of leaving it as a surplus, as then Mayor Jack Young did. If Board of Estimates members do not make substantive cuts to the police budget, I would urge the City Council members to do so and redistribute that money to worthy causes such as affordable housing, public school education, land trusts, or public health initiatives. I watched all the final police budget hearings from last year, and Commissioner Harrison compared defunding the police to building a new stadium. He said that you can't destroy the current stadium until the new and improved one is built. Several council members took issue with this and asked, why are we continuing to add bricks to a stadium when the stadium is essentially on fire? We can't keep throwing money at an institution that is morally bankrupt and continues to destroy lives and sow destruction in the city. The only solution is abolition. Defund the Baltimore Police Department. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. And just so we are clear and we're all on the same page, the appropriation authority associated with the council does not begin in this budget. It does not. It begins in the next budget, in the FY23 budget. Also, just to make sure we're clear and we're all on the same page, large percentage of the money that the previous council cut from the budget, from BPD's budget, was grant money that was returned back to the state because it could not be reallocated to anything else. The city does not have the authority or the power that money was directly related to specific activity and provided from the state and could not be reallocated. So again, I think the important note for everyone knowledge is there was a charter amendment that the previous council passed to provide council with budgetary powers, but that does not begin with this budget as the previous caller stated. Matt, please go on to the next president.
Yes, Mr. President, the next person signed up to testify is Rishi Shah, and I will unmute them now.
Good evening to the members of the Board of Estimates. My name is Rishi Shah. I'm a Mount Vernon resident and an associate with Maryland PIRG, a public interest advocacy organization. I wanted to ask the Board of Estimates to invest in the Fair Election Fund in FY22. A fair election program will be better for candidates, elected officials, better for the public, and better for Baltimore and Baltimore's democracy as a whole. Access to these large campaign contributions, which few Baltimoreans can actually afford to make, have way too much influence on what sort of people can run for office, what sorts of issues make it onto the agenda, and ultimately who ends up winning elections. And women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ community, as well as other minority groups, are much less likely to have access to the big money donations needed to win elections. The Fair Elections program enables candidates to run for office with small donations from their constituents and remain competitive with candidates that do choose to accept large and corporate contributions, which ultimately ends up reducing the influence of these large donor campaign spending, and it allows for a more diverse set of candidates to run for office. When properly funded, these types of programs really do work. For example, in Montgomery County, as well as in Washington, D.C., this system encouraged greater participation in elections. It reduced the influence of large donors, and it enabled more residents to actually be able to run for public office. We applaud the Baltimore City Council for voting to support the implementation of the Fair Election Fund and Commission last year. And the next step in that process is to fully fund the program. And we really hope that you take this opportunity to reduce the influence of big money in Baltimore politics and bolster our democracy. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay, the next person to testify is Jocelyn Providence, and I will unmute them now.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Jocelyn.
Okay, great. Thank you. My name is Jocelyn Providence. I'm a school teacher in Baltimore City Public Schools, and I live in District 3. So last year, when Mayor Scott told Baltimore he was committed to our public schools, in the AFT Maryland mayoral candidate questionnaire, he said, quote, "I believe the structural funding gap is the most important issue facing Baltimore City Public Schools." He promised that, quote, "When elected, I will prioritize making full payments to the local contribution of Kerwin so that along with our state, we will finally fully fund our schools," end quote. To fully fund the city's contribution to Kerwin, Mayor Scott also promised to find another $300 million for city schools. Instead, the proposed budget for fiscal year 2022 reduces funding to city schools by $41.2 million compared to fiscal year 21. The administration wants to justify that these cuts are okay by saying that the federal COVID relief funding will fill the gap, but federal funds will not last forever. Budget line items have a way of persisting, and budgets are moral documents that display what a community values. City schools has been underfunded for long enough. We must set a precedent now that Baltimore City Public Schools fully needs to be funded. During his campaign also, Mayor Scott also said that he would set a new vision for public safety rooted in opportunity and investment in our youth, not continuing reliance on policing and incarceration. In the heat of the mayoral campaign, last year's budget season, and also Black Lives Matter protests, he was quoted saying, quote, at last year's budget hearing, and I was clear with the BPD that we know that we have to reduce the city's dependence on Baltimore Police Department and reimagine our budget. Instead, the proposed budget for fiscal year 22 cuts funding to Youth Works and the Department of Recs and Parks, which are key resources for our kids. And despite cuts to the foundational resources for our youth, the proposed budget for the police department continues to increase by $27.6 million. So in conclusion, quickly, like we believe in Baltimore that values our children, and our budget must reflect that. And like someone said before, we need to make sure that these systems that have failed our youth and have failed people over time are addressed, and we can do that by investing in our schools. And like Frederick Douglass said, it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person signed up to testify is Julie Merrill, and I will unmute them now.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Julie, we can hear you. Julie?
I'm so sorry. I'm not sure if I'm on.
You're on. We can hear you loud and clear. You can begin.
I am so sorry. I think it muted. Okay. Hello. My name is Julie Merrill. As a special educator at Baltimore City Schools, as a resident of Upper Falls in District 1, and as a queer woman living in Baltimore, I am testifying today to demand that the mayor and city council reallocate resources from the current budget away from the police. As countless researchers have demonstrated time and time again, increasing police budgets does not decrease crime. Instead, providing housing, quality education, youth programming, and access to food, transportation, and healthcare for people reduces the circumstances that lead to crime in the first place. Budgets show priorities. Right now, the mayor is showing that he cares more about providing surveillance technology and deadly weapons to police officers than he cares about investing in Black neighborhoods, families, and kids. As a teacher in Baltimore City, I work in a building that does not have potable water due to lead pipes, that does not have reliable heating or air conditioning, that has classes of over 40 students, that has mice, cockroaches, and other pests living in the walls, and that is armed with surveillance cameras, metal detectors, and a school resource police officer instead of adequate funding for social workers, special educators, or reading interventions. I spent countless hours this year talking with my students who are mourning the Black people killed by police across the country and who remember the uprising from 6 years ago. Each day, my students walk into a building that reminds them that the city cares more about policing them than investing in their education or their futures. Carceral punishments do not provide justice. Arresting people does not right any wrongs. Please reduce the funding from the police department and instead fund our communities to stop injustices from happening in the first place. I join in the community demands that you cut $100 million from the BPD budget to be allocated to a community wellness trust fund in Black communities. Additionally, it is imperative for Baltimore to begin developing alternatives to 911 to cut police from responding to mental health, substance use, sex work, homelessness, and other sensitive calls that are continually escalated by police. I echo another caller to say I am extremely disappointed in Mayor Scott and I regret voting for him last year. Thank you for your time.
Okay, the next person signed up to testify is Ava Budas from Arcadia, and I will unmute them now.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm a longtime Baltimore City resident, homeowner, owned a business for over 25 years in South Baltimore, had many issues with crime, interactions with the police department, and as a business owner, I want to add my voice to my fellow citizens and say, please, when you're coming up with the next budget, redirect funds from the police department to programs such as education that will prevent crime. I can spend a whole day telling stories about bad police officers. I can also spend a whole day telling stories about good police officers. The best thing you can do for the good police officers, the ones who want to help the communities, is to invest in education and social programs that take the stress off them by preventing crime. Education in particular, I don't know how you're going to do it, but COVID-19 has put such a strain on the schools. My son is a public school teacher. I volunteer with an organization called Thread. And the burden that will be on teachers come September after this lost year will be even greater than the burden they have borne, which has already been too much. When I was in school back in the Middle Ages, we had assistant teachers and school nurses. Now there is more stress on the children, more to learn, and yet there appears to be less resources for them and for the teachers. Art, sports, science, giving the kids something to look forward to, giving them areas where they can thrive and find their niche in society, giving them a chance to get out and exercise and use their energies to something productive will lessen crime, will improve communities, and will utilize all the human resources that are otherwise lost. So again, from someone in the business community, please look to investing in education, and thank you very much for this.
Our next testifier will be Sunny Shim, and I will unmute them now.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we hear you. Yes,
Okay.
Sonny, we can hear you.
Hi, to Mayor Scott and Board of Estimates. I'm here, my name is Sunny Shin, and I'm a resident of Mount Vernon, but I'm here to represent Baltimore Asian Resistance and Solidarity, or BARS. We are a collective of Asian and Pacific Islander city residents organizing for anti-racism, formed in response to police brutality against Michael Brown and Freddie Gray in the winter of 2015. BARS brings together Asians and Pacific Islanders of all backgrounds in Baltimore to work in solidarity with our neighbors and the communities we share. Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQIA, women, working class, disabled folks, incarcerated people, immigrants, refugees, and more. We represent a justice-oriented AAPI community with a diverse group of people from all fields, including advocates, academics, students, workers, and creatives. We're primarily writing to echo the call of Organizing Black and many other Baltimore City groups and residents to oppose the proposed 5% increase in funding to the Baltimore City Police Department. I'm just gonna, it's all been said before, so I also want to echo my support of Baltimore Safe Haven. And yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person on our list is Nabia Aziz, and I will unmute them now.
Hello, thank you staff and members of the Board of Estimates. My name is Nabia Aziz. I am a homeowner in the 7 Districts Parkway community, which is part of the Greater Mondawmin Coordinating Council. I serve on the Board of Communities United, where I was formerly a paid staff member. I'm also affiliated with the Muslim Community Cultural Center of Baltimore, No Boundaries Coalition, and the Baltimore City chapter of the NAACP. And I'm also a proud registered small business owner in Baltimore City. I have been reading the same testimony for the past 3 years. I do not support this year's preliminary budget. We continue to spend too much money on policing in our city per capita and continue to outspend 72 other similar urban cities year after year, as evidenced in the Center for Popular Democracy's Freedom to Thrive report or the Vera Institute of Justice's What Policing Costs website. Cities such as Chicago, New York, and DC. Even with a 25% reduction in police spending, we still would have one of the most expensive police departments in the country. The city spending should reflect the values and needs of the communities we serve. Black communities need stronger schools infrastructure, better city services, and other resources such as funding recommendations for Kerwin Fully, affordable housing, and harm reduction. We do not need over-policing or a lack of resources due to police overspending. I want to see a moral budget, one that brings real change, not temporary or cosmetic change. Policing reform can exist while we also defund policing in order to refund the communities that police are supposed to protect and serve. I urge you to seriously reconsider the preliminary fiscal year 2022 budget. We seriously need to consider a participatory budgeting process in Baltimore. And as a city, we still have not gotten it right, and that is why I oppose the preliminary budget. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Timothy Chance, and I will unmute Timothy at this time.
All right, thanks. Thank you all for the opportunity to testify today. So my name is Tim Chance. I am the Tangled Title Attorney at Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Service, and I assist with our My Home, My Deed, My Legacy project. And as part of this project, I encounter many clients who are embroiled in tangled title issues and are facing homelessness as a direct result of tax sale. So in the My Home, My Deed project, we provide homeowner clinics to help Marylanders stabilize their homes and secure critically important resources, including the homeowner's property tax, credit, for the long-term ability to remain in their homes. Additionally, we provide continuing direct representation, both by volunteer attorneys and myself, to clients seeking to retitle their homes into their names. Many of these clients are the surviving relatives of deceased homeowners. Oftentimes, the home is the only asset. Our clients live in the home. They are the de facto owners, but these homes are still titled in the deceased name. They must go through probate to retitle the deed. Probate's costly and time-consuming. And in addition to the fees, which are often insurmountable, our clients must remain current on the property taxes in order to eventually record the new deed. Without access to many programs such as their property tax credit, many of our clients fall into homelessness because of tax sale. A recent client of ours lives in a home that was titled in his deceased mother's name. The client opened an estate for his mother in 2019, and the estate has since closed. The client's been trying to record a deed since the closing. They originally tried to record a deed in 2020, and at that time, the tax bill was almost $3,000. The client was unable to pay this because they're unable to work. This bill was only satisfied due to a private charitable benefactor paying the taxes after hearing the negative impact of tax sale on Baltimore's families. The client then immediately began taking the steps to record a new deed, but the city lost his deed, and now the client is in tax sale again for this year and is facing homelessness again. So unfortunately, the situation is all too common. I'm deeply committed to the stabilization of our communities, and for too many Baltimoreans with tangled titles, tax sale leads directly to homelessness. So for that reason, I am advocating for the cancellation of this year's tax sale. Thank you.
Okay, the next person signed up to testify is Laurel 80 from Able, and I will unmute her at this time.
Hi, my name is Laurel 80. My pronouns are she, her, and I help pay your salaries by living in historic Able, just next to Greenmount Avenue, which was historically a boundary for redlining in this part of town, and was originally and continues to be inhabited by members of the Piscataway and other tribes. I worked in COVID response through the Baltimore Health Corps and Healthcare Access Maryland for the last 5 months, and during the 4 months that I was actively taking calls from clients, from folks who most needed resources, I spoke with only 3 white clients. And the number one need was financial resources, which they could not access due to high call volumes at all city departments. This is somewhat understandable due to the massive impact that COVID had and continues to have in the United States. However, when the police budget is so much higher than that of the education, transit, Parks and Rec, and mental health services, it is absolutely deplorable that the citizens of Baltimore went without what they needed while they were and continue to recover from COVID. You have it written out on paper for us all to see. There is money to fund the departments and initiatives if it's taken from the department that is currently an incredible blight to the people who need the most assistance. The police don't prevent crimes from happening, and they often don't provide much assistance once a crime has actually happened. Divest from the police budget, $100 million sounds good to me too, and invest in trauma-informed care efforts, the Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights, schools that maybe even have functioning HVAC systems, affordable housing, community farms, trustworthy public transit, universal healthcare, including mental health and safe consumption sites, and all other initiatives that invest directly into the communities that have been strategically and intentionally ignored and underfunded. The budget allocates approximately $900 per citizen for police actions. Give mine back to me, and I will donate it to a mutual aid effort who actively care for our most vulnerable citizens. We have an opportunity to be example for the nation and for the world. It's been a real bad year for a lot of reasons, and let's take police brutality out of the equation in the future. I also absolutely do not support the Hopkins private police force and believe that city officials should do everything that they can to keep that from coming into fruition. I also echo Organizing Blacks and Baltimore Safe Havens demands. I also request that any person employed by Baltimore City live within city limits. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person on our list is Christina Simmons, and I will unmute her now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Christina, we can hear you. You can begin.
All right, thank you. Thank you for taking time to hear us tonight. I am speaking here today as a 23-year-old college graduate, child caregiver, organizer with Showing Up for Racial Justice, and a resident of Hamden, which is occupied Piscataway Conoy land. I echo the voices tonight that have asked you to divest $100 million from the over $500 million Baltimore Police Department budget and redirect those funds to transparent and accountable community-led solutions that address the root cause of crime. As stated previously, you can't police poverty, but we can invest in impoverished communities. According to Mayor Scott's Violence Prevention Report, the unemployment rate in 2018 was 37%. Additionally, on average, 28% of students in Baltimore do not graduate, and that rate goes up to 45% for Latinx students. There's also been countless times my gut has twisted as I walk past a person who has passed out on the street, knowing there is no number that I can call that won't put them at more risk. It's not right, and we need to invest in holistic healing for impoverished communities. Meanwhile, the budget pays more for BPD than schools, housing, violence prevention initiatives, substance abuse treatments, and rec and parks combined. Again, I echo the demands that you divest $100 million from Baltimore Police Department budget and redirect those funds to transparent and accountable community-led solutions that address the root cause of crime, including a trust that communities can dictate where and how the money is reinvested. Finally, as a member of Surge Baltimore, I stand in solidarity with Baltimore Safe Haven in their demands for financial support for the LGBTQ folks experiencing homelessness, access to a building from the city, grant funds for trans-led orgs to provide direct services, and the creation of an LGBTQ office in City Hall. And lastly, I do want to point out that the majority of testimony tonight has been to defund the police, and not one person has disagreed. Democracy does not mean shit if the people who are elected into power do not serve the people's demands. Thank you for your time.
Okay, our next person signed up to testify. They only gave their first name. It is Roger from Hamilton. There is one Roger on the attendee list, so I will unmute that person at this time.
That's the outside of that same house.
All right. Okay, the next person on our list is Babatunde Salam from Reservoir Hill. I will unmute them at this time.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Baba.
How City Council, President, Controller, Mayor. I'm a native resident and educator from West Baltimore for decades. I'm disappointed, honestly, and just disgusted by the sycophantic and groveling nature of the City Council to the Fraternal Order of Police. As dozens of people have mentioned, despite the decrease in population of Baltimore from 1970s to now, we have continued to see increased budgets for the Baltimore City Police Department over the last 30 plus years. Baltimore City Police have a murder clearance rate of less than 35%. Personally, me and my friends can go out and solve more murders than what the Baltimore City Police Department does. We need to stop funding police overtime. Police do not prevent crime. They don't stop crime while it's happening or solve crime. In fact, the police commit crime. As the Gun Trace Task Force is known, they were gallivanting around our city, robbing citizens, planting weapons, and looking dumb. We need to immediately dismantle the Fraternal Order Police. They're not a union, they're a clown show, a circus. Black Baltimore City workers want and need an immediate increase to the minimum wage to $15 an hour so that they can feed their families. And it needs to happen before 2025, right? If we want to invest in our city, then we need to make sure that our workers are being paid at something that's not a slave wage, something that is not just basically giving money to corporations and large conglomerates. Baltimore City families need immediate rent control measures, and as Nneka Nnamdi mentioned, a pause on the lien and tax sales for Black families. The current budget does not represent Black working class families, and it does not reflect what Baltimore City residents want and need.
Okay, the next person on our list is Joseph Galarraga, and I will unmute Joseph now.
Hi, everybody. My name's Joseph Galarraga. I'm an environmental health scientist with the University of Maryland. The public health literature is conclusive. Housing, education, socioeconomic status, green space, and transportation, they're all determinants of health. All of these components of the built environment have the potential to support people to achieve their highest potential. But pathogenic features of the environment have the potential to detract from such achievement. And I think in the context of environmental public health, it's safe to say that housing, schools, jobs, parks, public transportation all have the ability to promote healthy communities, while constant police surveillance, police violence, and incarceration cause stress and prevent people from living their lives in a dignified way. I support the calls for divestment from the Baltimore Police Department and investment in infrastructure that has potential to truly uplift people. This city owes it to its residents to give them the opportunities to succeed in life, but there needs to be the political will to make a change. Thanks so much for hearing all of us tonight. I understand what you're saying about the city council not having the ability to reallocate these funds, but in hearing us out and hearing what the constituents want for future budgets, hope that goes into consideration. Thank you very much.
No, thank you for your time.
Okay, the next person signed up to offer testimony is David Heilker, and I will unmute him now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Dave.
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Dave Heilker. I'm a resident of Remington, and I'm speaking today on behalf of people who are no longer with us to do so themselves. We must defund Baltimore police. They are, like all police, servants of capital and a murderous terrorist organization. Throughout the United States, 275 people have been killed by police so far in 2021. I'm going to read their names to stop me from talking. Ma'Khia Bryant, Larry Jenkins, Robert Douglas Delgado, Jacob Wood, Marcelo Garcia, Lindoni Mayani, Peyton Ham, Pierre Alexander Shelton, Anthony J. Thompson, Dante Wright, Joshua Milton, Douglas C. Barton, Deshaun Tanner, James Alexander, Tyler R. Green, Devin Cook Kendall, Silas Lambert, Iramamber Seacop, Roy Jackal, Samuel Yeager, Juan Carlos Estrada, Jose Arenas, Jeffrey Apple, Gabriel Casso, N. Viertel, Noah Green, Stephen Ross Glass, James Eiler, Deshaun Tatum, Jeffrey Eli, Aaron Pouch, Ivan Cuevas, Anthony Alvarez, Willie Roy Allen, Shelby Jean Burkheimer, Michael Leon Hughes, Jonathan B. Kohler, Matthew Blaylock, Adam Toledo, Robert Lee Conchola, Chris Ruiz, Daniel Nolan, Donovan Lynch, Stephen Michael Keelan, Eric Leach, Charles C. White, Trayvon Chadwell, Kelly Rooks, Joshua Gloria, Tony Smith, Irvin Silas Myers, David Hill, Eduardo Parra, Gerald Wayne Marlin,
30 seconds remaining.
Sean Michael Ivinick, James Ambrodo, Michael Dexter Jenkins, Daryl L. Jordan, Leonard John Papa, Juan Jimenez Salas, Sean Myers, David Suarez, Jorge Armando Cerda, Stephen James Hughes, Kelly Shannon Bowen, Christopher Ruffin, Ryan Mountain Soft, David Ordaz, Angel Delgado, Dustin Black, Douglas William Strobel, Nika
Your
Nicole.
time has expired.
Thank you.
Yeah, Matt, let him finish. You can finish, sir.
Thank you. Howayne Gale, Joel Weldon, Jesse Peter, Andrew Teague, Justin Lynn, Judson Album, Dwight Brown, Adam Cunningham, Farrah Rauch, Fred Trundle, Roger Gibson, Shannon Savela, David Savela, Rudy DeViver, Maggie Dickerson, Frederick Height, Isaiah Strong, Dakota Richards, Thomas Mack, Benjamin Tyson, Adam Lunt, Donald Hairston, Juan Hernandez, David Joseph Wayne Conwell, Alante Murthy, Dale Dunn, Carlton Adams, Dominic Koch, Daniel Neal, Andrew Allen Corser, Randall Lockaby, Haley Stainbrook, Christian Alexander, Arnell States, Claude Trevino, Timothy Franson, Ryan Shirey, William Blackwell, Timothy Statham, Derek Hayden, Juan Carlos Peña Nonda, Troy Allen, Francisco Flores, Royce Robertson, Adam Connors, Bruce Deal, Devarian Kennard, Gregory Chandler Metz, Jonathan Turner, Edwin Velasquez, Clifford Wilbur, Jacob Aaron Thomas, Eric Porter, Brian Ellis, Jordan Walton, Cortez Bogan, Greg Taylor, Trey Bartholomew, Joseph Johnson, Clay Tatum, Shay Jones, Brooke Blair, Dustin Powell, Brian Scott, Anthony Loya, Kevin Coslow, Dennis Denham, Dino Morales, Keenan Saylor, Anthony Greco, Christopher Higgins, Philip Francis, Andrew Hogan, Omar Cueva, Tilford Barton, Trey Webster, Dante Green, Josu Cruz, Genoa Donald, Ariella Crawford, Omar Cueva, Nicholas Pingle, Tracy Walter Hensley, Joshua Kreitz, Anthony Renwert, Andrew Kislick, Richard Thomas, Kevin Hayes, Carl Walker, Ezekiel Meza, Franklin Gray, Keith Scales, Kenneth Michael Dallas, Javier Magdaleno, Eric Mejia, Randy Miller, Mark Meza, Harmony Wolfgram, Felix Santos, Eric Bittner, Juan Osby, Tyree Rogers, Caleb McCree, Stephen Verdone, Ryan Stallings, David Tovar, Brian Abbott, Frank Gonzalez, UC Cater, Bradley Lewis, Christopher Dockery, Robert Bull, Robert Calderon, Christopher Harris, Kevin Wells, Daniel Young, Zentarius Johnson, Daniel Canales, John Paul Stanley, Reginald Johnson, Kershawn Geiger, Jeffrey Kite, Justin Peguis, Lyman Moses, Joshua Von Machado, Ty Donahue, Gary Rodriguez, Antonio Carbajal, Joseph Howell, Daryl Dye, Junius Thomas, Patrick Lynn Warren, Brian Williams, Xavier Hill, Alan Merzian, Mark Bivens, Betty Francois, Matthew Oxendine, Jason Nightingale, Paul Bolden, Quamina Akron, Charles Williams, Brian Andren, John Knightling, Ashley Bobbitt, John Ryan McDuff, Benicio Vasquez, Michael Conlon, Vincent Belmonte, Sean McCoy, Jose Guzman, Alexander Gonzalez, Michael Romo, Amanda Faulkner, James Reisling, Ligarian Lamar Smith, Henry Martinez, Anthony Cano, Daniel Alvarado, Carl Dorsey, and Isaac Matheny. Thank you.
No, thank you for lifting all those tragedies. We understand and know that the work that we do here in City Hall, be it the administration, the comptroller's office, or the city council, fight every day to ensure that those lost from our community do not die in vain. And we appreciate you taking the time out to lift their names up tonight as we talk about this important task for city government, but more importantly, for the residents of Baltimore.
Our next person on our list to testify is Shaquille Carbone, and I will unmute them at this time.
In March, Communities United sent a letter to City Hall asking that Baltimore breaks with the budgeting priorities that are reminiscent of the notorious Old Guard and take the bold stance to defund the Baltimore Police Department by 25% in order to refund our communities. I am glad that Mayor Scott acknowledged in the beginning of this session that the BPD is a burden on the budget because anything else would be a lie. Baltimore is one of the blackest cities in America, and it leads the nation in per capita spending for police. Last year, per capita spending for police was around $840 per resident, and the recent increases takes it to almost $960. Or in other words, our per capita spending is bigger than 72 of the biggest cities in America. While we are comforted by the information that the new administration will create a task force to study and research a 5-year plan to reduce police spending, we need not a task force to know that BPD is overbloated and a burden on the city's spending. This recent move to increase police spending has rendered last year's cuts ceremonious, and we do not need ceremonious leadership. For the first time in Baltimore's history, the top 3 elected seats are held by Black men. I ask that Mayor Scott, President Mosby, and Comptroller Henry, whose comments at the beginning I really do appreciate, abscond from political posturing and use your positions to radically destroy inequity in our city by defunding to refund. And with that, I yield.
Okay, the next person on our list this evening is Megan Kenny, and I will unmute Megan now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Megan, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. I am a Baltimore City resident. I live in Belvedere, Chinkopin Park, District 4. I'm here to voice my concerns about the increased funding in BPD. I firmly believe that we should be defunding BPD. That is not an emotional response. That is based on data and lived experience of the people of the community, of the people of Baltimore. You can look at the dropped case rate of individual police officers, and you can find that certain police officers have 80%, 60 to 80% of the cases that they're involved in are dropped. So what are they doing? They're arresting people, and then the case gets dropped. So we're funding people to put people in handcuffs and then put them in a cage only to be released later because they never should have been arrested to begin with. This is based on data that is publicly available. I'm a data analyst. I was trained at Johns Hopkins University where I got my graduate degree in public policy. I'm also for not having Hopkins police. I know that's not on this thing right now, but I'm also a graduate of Yale University. I got my bachelor's degree up in New Haven in '98. They have their own police department, and guess what happens? They terrorize the residents of New Haven, Connecticut, where all the other kids, like myself, I did it, I admit it, partied in my dorm room. So that's what's going to happen at Hopkins, because it happened at Yale and I saw it. Anyways, defund BPD. There's put money towards alternatives to 911, put money to violence interrupters and disruptors. There's no reason to have these people walking around with badges and guns getting to do whatever they want. This is bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. Defund BPD. Thank you for listening. I yield my time.
The next person signed up is Maggie Villegas from Edner Gardens, and I will unmute her now.
Good evening. I stand in solidarity with Organizing Black in calling for the defunding of the Baltimore City Police Department by cutting $100 million from the BPD budget. I call for the creation of a community wellness trust fund governed through a participatory budget process that funds be reinvested in Black and Brown communities, such as quality affordable housing, education, universal health care and income, jobs and community programs. I call for the removal of the police from responses to mental health distress, substance abuse, sex work, homelessness, and other quality of life issues, and instead for the creation of an alternative to 911 that does not dispatch the Baltimore police and instead connects people in distress to the needed resources. I echo the demands of Fight Blight Be More for the cancellation of this year's tax sale and stand in solidarity with Baltimore Safe Haven's demands to support our LGBTQ community. Thank you.
I believe this is the last person that we have on our list this evening. We have Madeline Becker, and I will unmute her at this time.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I'm a bit emotional after listening to everybody. Uh, but I thank you for your time to listen. This is not my first Taxpayers Night. And saying a similar thing to what has been said in years past, which is to defund from the Baltimore Police Department and refund those funds into just about everything other than the police department. I'm a resident in the Bromo Arts District. I live next to Lexington Market. I'm a small business owner, a film teacher at the Baltimore School for the Arts. I'm also a district representative for the International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees, Local 487, working in film and television production in the region. I'm also queer and non-binary artist, and I'm very emotional right now after listening to everyone, and I stand in solidarity with the folks tonight. And I really want Baltimore Safe Haven to be funded. I've also sent you written testimony to read in case I don't have enough time. But even when adjusting for inflation, spending on police increased 173% between 1965 and 2005, accounting for a larger share of the city budget over time. And funding for the police has continued to grow in subsequent years. Meanwhile, the city's population decreased 32% from almost 1 million to 640,000 in 2005 to 593,000 in 2019. Study after study shows that a living wage, access to holistic health services and treatment, educational opportunity, and stable housing are far more successful in reducing crime than police or prisons. As a part-time teacher working virtually for over a year now, it is even more evident we need a complete overhaul of how our school system functions. At the Baltimore School for the Arts, we have more resources than many other students and teachers in Baltimore City Public Schools. It is still not enough. We are currently grappling with sexual harassment within our school. We have students going to parking lots for Wi-Fi to attend class. Students are experiencing cyberbullying, meaning that they keep their cameras off, and I teach to a room of screens with names, and I haven't met half my students in person. And all of this is on top of the isolation that comes from learning with laptop teachers who are overworked and underpaid. At least they don't have to be in the school building and around the Baltimore City Public Schools Police Department. Being part-time means I receive no benefits, no retirement, and I'm hourly. I work far longer hours than I get paid, and I'm expected to be okay with it because kids are our future and we all have to do what we need to do to get them through. But I don't want to just get kids through. I want them to thrive. I want them to be strong for the film industry they dream of entering, an industry that will require of them everything they have. And for that, we as teachers need respect, better training for mental health issues, and ideally classrooms that have 2 teachers co-teaching. Beyond the BSA, I emphasize that all schools across the city need art in their schools. Art heals, art brings people together. Art provides a safe space for artists with mental health and physical disabilities. Anchoring my life around art has led me to collaborate with artists at Make Studio in Hamden. Make Studio is a gallery and workshop space for artists with disabilities for artists across the city. They come in to make art, be in community, show and sell their artwork. It is an inspiring place, and the artists and staff there reinforce that art is necessary. Yet the police and sheriff's department still received outsized funding compared to the substance use disorder and mental health program in the 2022 preliminary budget. 851 people died of opioid-related deaths, and this comes from Communities United in Baltimore in 2019. There were 333 homicides in Baltimore in 2020, less than half of the number of opioid deaths. The numbers aren't adding up. Finally, I emphasize the need for quality jobs that emphasize safe workspaces, places, and workers say in their contracts, which is collective bargaining, which we are currently in our ASA collective bargaining as in our union right now. I am grateful to be a member and district representative of IATSE Local 487. The International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees is an international union of technicians and craftspeople with over 1,000 members in our Local 487 DMV region. Because of them, I have incredible health care. Teaching doesn't do that for me, but the union does, which I haven't paid a cent for during this pandemic. I have access to craft skill training and access to work on shows by HBO, Showtime, Apple TV, CBS, Hulu, and more. Often, though, I have to go to Richmond, Virginia, New York City, Philly, and DC to make a living because there's not enough opportunity in Baltimore. So I'm a nomad. I live in Market Center, but I'm in Charles Village. I live everywhere. Invest in groups who are already here, like Griot Works for filmmakers, Code in School, and so many more, as well as city programs like Youth Works, which I've hired from in the past for my own projects. Every child should have access to their dreams. That being said, freelancing as an artist is not easy. My tax money came from working over 30 freelance gigs last year, amounting to 23 1099s, 5 W-2s, and countless gigs that didn't qualify for a 1099, but I still have to report as income. This amounts to a nightmare of paperwork when I do my taxes, which are funding a budget that I don't even
Your
support.
time has expired.
Thank you.
No, thank you for your passion. I would like to personally thank the dozens. We don't have an exact count of individuals who dialed in. What do you say, Matt?
Mr. President, we actually we have one more person on the list that I overlooked previously.
Uh-oh.
So I
Okay.
do apologize.
Not a problem.
So
Let everybody speak.
The last person on our list of registrants is Aaliyah Abid, and I will unmute her now.
Hello, my name is Aaliyah Abid, and I'm 18 years old. I graduated from Baltimore City Public Schools last year, and I'm currently a student at Baltimore County CCBC, Community College of Baltimore County. And firstly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, but also one thing that really needs to be addressed is investing money towards digital equity resources, because I understand that, Mr. Scott, that you created the digital equity director position, but there's not really anywhere in the report that mentions money invested in digital equity other than that. We definitely need money put towards resources, and putting that towards like broadband internet and as well as digital literacy trainings, especially in our school system. We already have organizations that are opting to provide free high-speed internet to families in the city, as well as low cost or free devices. And we need to support local, because these organizations are already here and they have to rely on grant funding and generous donors when they should be getting support from our government. Also, something that really needs to be addressed is the spending of the Baltimore City public school system. Public school system, because I understand that the Baltimore City public school system has the third highest spending rate per pupil out of the entire country, and yet we have so many problems. Like, we definitely need independent oversight for North Avenue, because if you ask anybody that is involved with the school system, they will tell you that they are not putting the resources towards the right things. For one thing, like other people have mentioned, the infrastructure of schools, many schools, is not good at all. Ceilings falling apart, walls falling apart. Not to mention the schools. My high school violated the Americans with Disabilities Act very often, because we have 4 floors and the elevator often was broken. So students that were injured and should have been able to take an elevator had to crawl down the steps to get to their classes, and that's not fair. And the same goes for a teacher that was recommended he transfer to a different school. That's illegal. That is sad. Another thing, like I was saying, with digital literacy, I guarantee that focusing on digital literacy and digital resources in the public education and the school system will improve score rates. It will improve aspirations. It will improve basically the entire public school system. We know that our world is depending on the ability to use digital resources, and I don't know how students are expected to perform well in the real world when the only time they have access to a device is in school, when their teacher rents a laptop cart once a month.
30 seconds.
And okay, thank you. And also, as for defunding the police, I would like to share that when my mother was robbed last year at gunpoint for her car, we called the police. My mother and I went to the police station. We filed a report with detectives, and the police did not file the report in the system until we involved council members. And when I asked for a copy from the police department, they misspelled her name despite being provided all the information and the fact that she provided a testimony. So I don't understand what is going on with the police department. I don't know necessarily about defunding. Something needs to change. We know that people don't trust the police, definitely in Baltimore City and across the country. How can you have a city with a majority of ethnic minorities and expect the police to be effective? And you need to invest money somewhere else and towards crime prevention that actually helps, that people trust. And we also need more funding towards mental health services, because we know that we have a big drug problem and we have mental health crises going on in our city. And people have to wait 2 weeks to receive treatment from an inpatient psychiatric facility, which makes no sense. And like, we have this drug problem, so why is that not being addressed? People need help. It's an addiction. It's a health problem. So we need to invest towards rehabilitation resources. I think a lot of the money needs to be redirected to these important things like digital resources, digital training, high-speed internet in the city, change the way money is spent in the public education, definitely oversee the school system, because they're not spending the money right at all, and they're doing things that are illegal. So thank you for listening.
No, thank you, Aaliyah. We appreciate every single resident who's taken time out to come and address us tonight, but we certainly love to hear from our young folks who are truly the future of the city. As I stated earlier, dozens had the opportunity, and we saw very passionate speeches. We saw a lot of information in detail.
Mr.
We
President.
know it's another one, Matt.
I'm sorry to do this to you again. I'm sorry. We do have one final speaker who
Matt. All right,
They
Matt.
did
No,
sign up properly in advance, and we missed them earlier in the program.
it's all good. We got to make sure that everybody that came to speak and signed up to speak gets a chance to speak. So not
Yes,
a problem.
sir. So we have Samantha Blau, and I'm going to unmute her now.
Thank you for sticking around. My name is Samantha Blau. I am the Policy Director with Baltimore Action Legal Team, and I'm a resident of Council District 1. A budget is a moral document. Each line item is a value statement. Every dollar Baltimore City allocates is a choice to invest in either the success or failure of our communities. Increasing the funding of the police department by $28 million is an investment in desperation and regressive policy. A police department is a city's last resort in dealing with crime, mental health, and conflict. You can only call the police after a negative event has occurred. In Baltimore, we have almost exclusively invested in policing, so our residents are in the position of watching and waiting while negative situations build, calling the police once a situation has played out and property and lives are damaged. If Baltimore valued every neighborhood and every resident, then its budget would reflect that valuation. The budget would have hundreds of millions of dollars for rec and parks and after-school programming. The budget would have line after line, page after page for various clinical and mobile health services. The budget would fund programs that were created by neighborhood leaders for their neighbors. The budget would invest in positivity and proactive policy. Instead of investing more money in a reactionary and violent enforcement strategy, we ask that the mayor adhere to Organizing Black's divestment and investment demands, and that the city put the $670 million worth of funds from the American Rescue Plan in a trust for education and ensure it is not distributed to the Baltimore Police Department. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Matt, is there anyone else that we might have skipped over or missed?
No, Mr. President. Everybody who was on our list has been called on. You are good to proceed, sir.
Are you sure? No, just kidding. First and foremost, like I've stated earlier, to the dozens of folks who took the time out to come and present to us, understand and know that I don't speak for myself. I speak for the entire board, that we truly, truly appreciate you participating in this process with us. Now, this is the initial start of the process. That's why we are calling it the preliminary FY22 budget. But it's a very important step. It's a step, as was stated by the previous caller, that at the end of the day, our budget is our priorities, just like your own personal budget is your own personal priorities. And this is truly the people's business. That's why it's important for this to be as transparent and accessible. And for those who dialed in to actually testify, to the folks who listened to us and listened to the presentation and the comments and the testimony and the passion on TV 25 or streamed it, we truly, truly appreciate you. What we will ask is that you continue to participate in this process. From here, the budget process will continue. The next steps of the budget process are as follows. I think it's really important for folks to understand that. The preliminary budget plan will be introduced to the Board of Estimates. Was introduced to the Board of Estimates in April the 7th. At this point right now, we're at the first Taxpayers Night of the Board of Estimates. The Board of Estimates have had the opportunity to sit down with BBMR 2 times prior to tonight. On May the 12th, the Board of Estimates will vote on a recommended budget. At that time, BBMR will present the ordinance of estimates for FY22, along with any recommended amendments or adjustments that have been proposed. From there, the proposed ordinance of estimates will be sent to the City Council, where we'll undergo further public vetting. In late May and early June, the council will hold public hearings with the city agencies, and those agencies propose budgets. This is the detailed view associated with the budgets of the agencies. They'll go over they'll go over the past budgets and how the actuals looked in the past, and go over the projections associated how they plan on spending the money. Lastly, the City Council will host its own Taxpayers Night in late May. The full list of Taxpayers Night and City Council budget hearings will be announced at an upcoming City Council meeting and will be posted to the public at the BaltimoreCityCouncil.com, our website. Again, www.BaltimoreCityCouncil.com. At this time, I would like to thank the Department of Finance as well as the BBMR staff. I would like to thank the council staff as well as the staff of all the members associated with the Board of Estimates. But for the big MVP of tonight comes along with our interpreters. They've stuck around with us this entire time. They've tried to listen through some choppy audio at times, and I think that they have done a tremendous job. So to our interpreters, thank you so much. You literally give us access to providing and ensuring that all Baltimoreans know exactly what's going on in this process. Again, I would like to thank everybody who tuned in and participated in tonight's meeting. Please know that there is still much more work to be done on this budget. While our fiscal outlook is not as dire as was predicted at the beginning of the pandemic, we're not yet out the woods. And this is truly, truly a interesting, very eventful, and sorry about that, and troubling times as we deal with COVID-19 and continue to deal with it. Budgets are about our values, as I stated, and we'll work to ensure that the budget reflects the values of our residents. We'll prioritize investments in our young people and giving them the helping hand that they need, as well as to our most vulnerable residents. We look forward to everyone to continue to participate as we continue to work our way out of the uncertainties associated with COVID. But as we saw great discourse and debate and discussion and an amazing amount of passion, we expect to see that same level of participation throughout this entire process. Again, I know this does not go from just my mouth to your ears, but I know that this is a true understanding and belief with all the members of this board, as well as with your city council. The only thing I ask is that next time when you come to participate, that you bring someone, be it your family member, your neighbor, a resident, because it is your eyes and your ears that are the people's voice, and we are your representatives to hear and listen to your concerns. So again, Baltimore, we absolutely love you. Thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to your continued participation in this process. Good night.